either. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was reading through articles and just kind of getting an idea of what it is that they are trying to communicate through the mainstream media and that propagandized information, and what it is that is really going to be coming from the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy strategies. Now, as I've been trying to communicate here on this channel, trying to share with you the information that I have gathered over the years, going through many documents, many speeches coming from the Federal Reserve, is that they have changed the way that they have conduct themselves. They conduct themselves differently than the way everybody had anticipated from the past. Now, ultimately, interest rate cuts is the most impactful thing, or interest rate hikes, depending on, I guess it's just the movement itself, right, is the most impactful thing that can occur coming from the Federal Reserve and their monetary policy as we know it. When we look at the Federal Reserve, we think, when are you going to cut? When are you going to raise? What are you going to do in the future? What is it, right? And this is what almost every single economist is hooked on, is this idea of like, what is coming into the future and how is it that the Federal Reserve is going to be acting with the unemployment, with, recessionary pressures, all this stuff, right? And that a September rate cut may be a quarter point, it may be a half a point. Like, nobody knows exactly what it is that the Federal Reserve is going to do in the future, but everybody seems to be in the mind that they are going to be doing something on account of everything that is happening within the economy. Now, I agree with all the logic that everybody has when it comes to that. Like, I listen to the economists and I say, yeah, that all makes sense. Every bit of it. Like, I'm not trying to argue that their facts are incorrect or something. That's not the case. However, the Federal Reserve doesn't do their monetary policy in the classical form of how people would understand it. They are not going to surprise the markets. They're not. We're not going to come to September and everybody's going to go, are they going to cut or not going to cut? That's not going to happen. The way the Federal Reserve is going to be conducting themselves is with forward guidance, signaling, jawboning, a credible threat. Now, if you think about it for just a minute, the Federal Reserve has left it open-ended, meaning that they don't know, right, what we're going to do in September. We may not. Hate to cut too early. If we have to reverse course, that would be a mistake. And there's all this talk about what's going on into the future. So now when it gets there, right, people are going to go, are they going to do it or not? That would be a shock to the market. That's not what the Federal Reserve is going to do. Now, if they do cut in September, there is going to be plenty of advance notice that they will be cutting in September. They may leave the adjustment to how much open, but they will definitely put into the market's perception there will be a cut. Not this, maybe not, it's on the table, could be, might have to pull it off, don't know, hate to cut too early and have to reverse. Like, none of that talk would be there. That would all be, like, none of that would be heard. That's the chatter we hear when they're trying to keep it open-ended. They want to be able to have the ability to guide the futures, or to guide the markets, right, their perception, with the ability to go out there into the mainstream media and flap off with some interviews about what it is that they feel is going to be happening. I'm talking like the different Fed governors. And by doing this, they can get the markets to say, oh, look, there's going to be rate cuts. We're going to have to go and start acting accordingly to this information. But yet that is not necessarily the credible threat, like what we are hearing from the Fed, like from the Fed governors individually in their interviews. When Jerome Powell comes out and says September rate cuts are going to happen, we just don't know if they're going to be a quarter point or a half a point. When information like that is being presented, then you know the rate cuts are on the table for real. All right? Like, they are definitely going to happen, because what they are trying to do is put that forward guidance into the market so that they will be acting accordingly. So when the rate cuts do happen, it's almost like a non-event. There is no shock. There is no change. Like, the day ahead of time to the day after was no difference. because everybody had already positioned themselves for the rate cut, so assured from the Federal Reserve's communication that they were going to happen. Not this, we don't know, maybe, could be, don't know, like none of that stuff would be there. And see, this is how most of the economists are getting it wrong. See, I go back and I look at Jefferson's speech. I should have left this down in the description. I'm sorry, guys. I didn't. This is May 13th of 2024 Federal Reserve speech given by Philip Jefferson, communicating about monetary policy. Right? Super important speech to read. Now, if you are a member of the channel, you probably have already heard this speech because we did this in a live stream that was a members only, where we covered every single word that was written in this speech, and we talked about it and learned from in this speech that it's more about the communications than it is anything else. In fact, this is coming from Mike Woodford, one of the developers of the new Keynesian model. Now, understanding that Keynesian economics is ultimately the way we are experiencing the economy today. I mean, even George Bush was saying we are all Keynesians now, right? Now, I'm not speaking for myself. I feel like I'm a free market individual who's making decisions for myself away from what it is that the government is deciding that they think I need to do. However, as the majority and the whole goes within the United States, the economy is basically a Keynesian model. Now, again, like, I'm not going to go too deep into Keynesian, but there's two schools of economic, like government intervened, central banking authority, Keynesian model, and then there's like free market Austrian economics. These are like the two kind of opposite of ends of, the economic, spectrum as far as that goes. However, Keynesian economics is what we're experiencing today. Whether good, bad, or ugly is like, I guess it's entirely up to you to decide that. But it says here, Mike Woodford, one of the developers of the new Keynesian model, put it this way: not only do expectations about policy matter, but very little else matters. See, this is the problem that the United States central banking authorities and the government and everybody else was facing within the powers that be, is that they were running out of monetary policy, meaning that when the Fed funds rate, which is the interest rate that the Federal Reserve is trying to set at the banking level, so when the big banks are lending to each other, they're trying to adjust that particular rate. You think about it, if the big banks are lending to each other, if there is any risk to be had, it's going to be, a higher interest rate going to like you or me or a business or something else like that. So like the banks are the safest ones to lend to each other. And then after that, they would be taking on risk. So if the Federal Reserve can adjust that overnight lending rate within the banking system, then most rates after that would then follow suit. So again, like when it comes to the Federal Reserve and communicating what it is that they're doing out there with the Fed funds rate, that is the most important aspect of it, because when the Fed funds rate had hit the lower bound of zero, that overnight lending rate was no longer an effective tool for trying to stimulate the economy, because you couldn't just lower it anymore. After you hit zero, essentially you'd have to go negative. It was, at this point that the Federal Reserve was out of policy. Like they were done. They were like, oh shit, what do we do now, right? Like if you can't lower rates, how do you stimulate the economy? But then they realized that their communications about the economy had more of an impact. In fact, that's what he just said. Not only do expectations about policy matter, like the way they communicate it, but nothing else matters, or very little else matters. Sorry, very little else matters. It goes on to say here, Phillips, this is in the speech. It goes on to say this: communicating a policy strategy and following through on it increased the credibility of the central bank, and therefore its ability to steer expectations in the economy. So again, this is very important. This is how they are now using their monetary policy. It's not the interest rate adjustments, it's their communications. Again, communicating about policy strategy and following through on it, right, increase the credibility of the central bank, and therefore its ability to steer expectations in the economy. So again, it's very important to follow through. So if they are going to shock the markets, that means they didn't communicate about it. See, that's like September rate cut. That doesn't make sense yet. Like if they started today communicating, yes, we are going to cut. We just don't know by how much yet. Okay, that's a different communication than maybe we'll have to wait and see, data dependent. That's like open-ended. That's not saying anything. That's leaving people going, what the hell's going to happen? Now, everybody's understanding of it that you read from the mainstream media is they have taken on a personal belief that it's a matter of definite cut, right? But they're trying to figure out by how much. But that's not what the Federal Reserve is saying. Like the Federal Reserve has not put any kind of rate cut on the table. All right. I mean, like, as far as like when Jerome Powell said rate cuts are on the table, no, he said if these conditions stay the same or go in this particular direction, then it's on the table. It's not on the table yet. These conditions have to be met first, but nobody hears that. All they heard was September rate cuts are on the table, but they didn't hear the preliminary part that said if unemployment continues to do its thing, if all this, like, all these conditions like he talked about, then it's on the table. But nobody heard that part. All they heard was it's on the table. Let's figure out by how much now. All right. And so again, 99% of the people got it wrong. They did not get this, the communication right. Clear communication has also helped stabilize the economy and keep inflation closer to the target because when the Fed clearly articulated a reaction function, financial markets would be able to anticipate the likely future course of monetary policy and help the central bank do its work by affecting long-term rates and other asset prices. See, they're going to be clear about it. They're going to be very clear. They're not clear right now. This is not a cutting policy. A cutting policy would be very clear because clear communications is more impactful to the economy than the actual rate cuts. And depending on how well they can communicate it will depend on how much power they can actually get out of that adjustment. It's very important to understand it that the interest rate cuts themselves, or just the adjustments, I shouldn't say cuts, the adjustments themselves are less impactful than what people are really anticipating going to be. And see, really, when it comes to stimulating the economy, the Federal Reserve can't lower rates to stimulate the economy. I really hope people understand this, that there is no position in which that the Federal Reserve can lower rates to stimulate the economy. I'll repeat it again. There is no position in which that the Federal Reserve can lower rate to stimulate the economy. And that might blow people's minds, and most economists that hear that would probably think that I am crazy for saying that. But it is the facts because of the low neutral interest rate, which is something that most economists don't even know about or let alone have internalized or put into their strategies of what it is that's taken place. But it is a huge, huge issue for the Federal Reserve. Monetary policy strategies for a low neutral interest rate world. We talk about it every single time in this on this channel. And it was kind of interesting. I actually found monetary policy strategies for a low neutral rate speech from Lael Brainerd that was dated back in 2015. And I was reading up on that, and that's a really telling speech as well. In fact, we should go and review that in a members only speech. Even though it's almost 10 years old now, that speech is super telling about how it was that they were going to be conducting themselves going into the future, knowing that they were going to be at the lower bound of zero. And that, this is something like here on this channel, I think that when I start diving into this stuff, it's usually over most people's heads. Like they just don't get it. They try to hold on to it, and then they can't hold it anymore. They're like, man, what the hell is he talking about, right? And I try to explain it as best I can, but it is a very complicated topic, and we are very much in the deep end of this discussion on what it is that's happening here with the Federal Reserve. But here's something that I found interesting that. And I'm not exactly sure if this is an exact number or if it was like like something that they had calculated as an assumption. But during the Great Financial Crisis, the neutral interest rate had gone negative by like, I don't know, like 4 percentage points or so like that. It was like negative 4%. So in order to stimulate the economy, the Federal Reserve would have had to take the Fed funds rate like down to 6.5% negative, right? Negative 6.5% on the Fed funds rate in order to use monetary policy with interest rate adjustments to stimulate the economy. It just wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. The neutral interest rate was so low, gone negative. The Fed funds rate had to gone negative. So they had to do something very different. And that's where the quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, and 4, which took the balance sheet of $850 billion to over $4.5 trillion. And if you remember, people lost their minds back then. Like, I mean, I know I was one of them. I'm like, man, I'm dumping every dime. Like, as somebody who didn't have anything, I dumped every dime I had into silver, believing that the Federal Reserve had destroyed the monetary policy or destroyed the dollar. Like, I thought that was it, right? We're done. Right. Not realizing that that was the game plan for when the Fed funds rate had hit zero and stimulating the economy was no longer the effective tool by dropping interest rates. Quantitative easing, forward guidance, inflation expectation being presented to the people on a massive scale, along with asset purchases, right? Which is the quantitative easing itself, the buying of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. This combination of effects had enough to actually get the economy moving in a way that wasn't like going into deflationary spiral, right? It didn't create inflation like a lot of people thought it would, me being one of them, right? It didn't create the inflationary scenario, but it did keep it from falling any further into deflation. And so here with all this quantitative easing and forward guidance, asset purchase, whatever, excuse me, they were able to at least keep a maintenance to the economy that kept them falling from any further into a deflationary spiral, which is what they were truly scared about, right? But as far as stimulating the economy with the interest rate adjustment, that wasn't going to happen anymore, right? And they knew it. They knew that that was coming to an end. And so understanding that it had come to an end, but nobody else really knew it, they could still use the interest rate adjustments as the communication object, knowing that it really wasn't going to actually stimulate the economy anymore. So when you think about it now, right, the neutral interest rate has risen up to very close to zero. Nobody knows exactly where it's at, right? And now this neutral interest rate, again, it's the rate that is neither accommodating nor restricting the economy. It means that the Fed funds rate is neutral. But again, being so close to zero, if they were to drop interest rates, the Fed funds rate back to the lower bound of zero, it would be so close to neutral, it still wouldn't stimulate the economy. It wouldn't have a stimulating effect. But if you think about it right now, the market perception does, right? They will start stimulating the economy. They will go out there and start acting accordingly on account of the idea that the rate adjustments are coming. And now, if you don't believe me, just look at some of the effects of what happened from the communications that took place over the last week and a half, 2 weeks. All right? The Federal Reserve has done nothing different. Zero, not a change. All right? And yet, when you go and you look at the mortgage refinancing, it ratcheted up, right? How? Because interest rates actually started to come down. Why? Because people started acting accordingly to the idea that there was going to be a September rate cut. But it was a panic. They freaked out. And then they came to their senses. And now, as the communication goes forward, if the Federal Reserve keeps it open-ended like they are doing right now, then you are probably going to find by the time we get to September, they're going to say, hey, at the next meeting, we will cut, right? But they are not going to do a cut by surprise. That's not the way the Federal Reserve operates. And so when you see people communicating about this idea that there's going to be a rate cut in September, but the Federal Reserve is saying, it's open-ended, it could be possibly, maybe, don't know. That's going to be a shocking event. That's not the way they do it. They are very clear in communication on what it is that they are planning on doing. And although it's not very although it's not very clear to a lot of people out there, it's clear to me because I understand what it is that they're trying to do with the credible threat. Right? Most people don't realize that they're using how important the communication is to the Federal Reserve. And so again, like if you want to know if they're going to be cutting, you can know it by listening to their words. We are going to cut, but we don't know by how much. Something of that nature. But if they are saying we're going to be data dependent, that's a no cut, right? That's a no cut communication that is happening right there. Because if they did cut, it would be a shock. That's not what they do, right? So it's going to be a clear communication that it's going to happen. This is not a clear. This is a no-cut communication. All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. We're 20 minutes into this video. I hope that I'm going to go back and thank you, Brody, the other day for reminding me to go grab the links and put it in there because I say I'm going to go get the links and then I don't do it. But I'm going to go get the link for this one, but you don't have to wait for me. You can just type in Federal Reserve speech, May 13th, 2024, communicating about monetary policy. You can go read the speech for yourself. Or you can go and pay the $1 and join the members only portion of this channel and go and listen to us review that speech where we break down the entire thing, talk about all the different stuff within it, how they came up with this idea for using their communications and how, see, like, here's something that I find, let me just kind of go right through here because I just came across a little spot where talking about Greenspan and how he used to communicate. Because remember, Alan Greenspan was basically was the Fed chairman, much like what Powell is today, or I mean, is what Powell is today. But when he communicated, it was horrible to try and understand it. Go back and listen to some of the Greenspan, statements and stuff. They're like so difficult, right? Let me see if this is okay. In May 1999, the FOMC started to publish statements after every meeting, even on occasions when there was no change in policy. By then, the move toward greater transparency was fully embraced by Chairman Greenspan, who had once prided himself on mumbling with great incoherence. Quoted. Right? That was, he prided himself on quoting. This is what he prided himself on, was mumbling with great incoherence. They didn't want to communicate anything to you. They wanted to hit you with a surprise back then because they thought that that was a more impactful way of dealing with monetary policy, by hitting people with the shock and awe. Like you just wake up one day and you're like, whoa, the Federal Reserve adjusted rates. And it was just like, yeah. And then markets would have to react to that. But then they found that they communicated about it. Wow, man, they could get more power out of it. And this is exactly what they started doing. Back in 1999, they started figuring this stuff out. And over the many years leading up to the great financial crisis, they had built the communication styles, the tools, the networks in order to deliver the message out there to the public, which before they never had. Right? You can see this being built. This is like, how long does this go back? I mean, 20 something years, 25, 30 years now. Here, it was like there was two main reasons for this change. First, it was thought that greater transparency would demonstrate the Fed's accountability to the public and safeguard its public independence. Second, there was a growing appreciation in the economics profession that clarity about the policy would improve macroeconomic outcomes. Expectations became a focal point in academic and policy circles with the emergence of the new Keynesian model in the 1990s as a framework for monetary policy. In these models, aligning the expectation with decision makers in the private sector with those of the policymakers produced superior economic outcomes. See, again, they're not going to shock you. They are going to tell you what they are going to do. And they're going to give you plenty of advance notice so that you will act accordingly. When it happens, it'll be almost like a non-event. I mean, you think about it. When the Federal Reserve raised rates, it almost had nothing. It had almost no impact on the economy whatsoever. Like markets didn't change, interest rates didn't change, nothing. Like everybody had already positioned themselves well in advance of the interest rate hikes that the Federal Reserve had plenty of communication about. In fact, people had such misunderstanding about how the Federal Reserve communication really impacts the economy is that they thought that the markets were acting ahead of the Federal Reserve, independent of the Federal Reserve, because the interest rate started to rise before the Federal Reserve had actually done anything with the Fed funds rate. That is the credible threat communication that was clearly working. And yet the economists out there like dismissed that, like literally turned a blind eye towards it and said, yeah, the Federal Reserve doesn't have any control over markets. Look, the interest rates are rising even though they haven't done anything yet. And I'm like, bro, they've been communicating about interest rate cuts for like 4 months now. Right? It's just like, obviously the markets are going to start acting accordingly. They're not going to sit around and going, okay, rate cuts tomorrow. As soon as they do, I'm going to act. Right? No, they're going to act ahead of time to get ready and positioned for those rate cuts. And that's exactly what was happening back then. And so economists who said that they had lost control of rates or something like that because they were acting independently of the Federal Reserve has no understanding of the credible threat theory and the forward guidance signaling, jawboning, transparent communications. Like, I mean, to me it's super obvious. Like, it's really obvious, but then I haven't ingrained the classical form of understanding the Federal Reserve so much that I can't see it any other way. And so trying to understand like the classical form of the Federal Reserve during a time in which that they were changing into this forward guidance credible threat sort of monetary policy, like I was learning these two things at the same time. Like I was understanding the classical form, but I could see that there was this other communication that was taking place. That's why I started focusing in so much on these speeches and these documents. It was like, because I go into the news and I read about that, and then I go to the documents, and I'm like, man, these are not jiving the same. Like, these two communications are not the same. Right? They sound similar in a lot of ways, and like the things they say are like communicated kind of the same way, but not the meanings that are really given behind it. Like they put this meaning behind this one, and everybody's like, oh man, Fed lost control, hyperinflation, all this other stuff. And then over here, they're talking about like, okay, getting the neutral interest rate to rise, to get the YAML back, the Fed funds rate, the communication styles, all this other stuff, average inflation rate, right, over time, not the same thing that they're communicating out there on the mainstream media. And so once I could see this, and it took me a while to like realize that, because I just thought that this stuff was just so complicated, and that they, the way that they worded it was just like, I mean, almost like its own language or something, and then it's being interpreted through the news. No, 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 no. That's not it at all, right? What they are communicating is something entirely different than what they are communicating out there on the mainstream media. Entirely different, because it's the communication that they are doing through the mainstream media that is guiding the markets. That is the monetary policy. The interest rate adjustments, that's the communication about it. That doesn't work nearly as well as the communication does. It's so, again, like, I don't know, I keep bringing it up, I keep trying to talk about it, and I try to share this idea because I really do feel that it's unique to this channel. I don't know if anybody else who has internalized it as much as we have tried to here on this channel, to understand it as best as we can from the Federal Reserve's view, because it doesn't matter what it is that we think should happen with monetary policy. These guys are in charge of it. They're going to be making decisions off of it, and we have to act accordingly to their decision making. We don't have any other choice in the matter. Like, we can't do anything about this outcome that they are going to put us into, but we do have a choice on how it is that we react to this information. And so, looking at like the mainstream media and following their stuff, it's going to be very difficult to understand what it is that the Federal Reserve is truly attempting to do, since most people do not get the credible threat theory. They do not understand average inflation rate over time. They do not get the, neutral interest rate issues that they are facing. Most of this stuff is not communicated through the mainstream media, propagandized information, and especially some of the economists out there, even the other YouTuber economists out there that are independent of the Fed communications and stuff like that, still don't bring this stuff up. They still don't talk about it. Like, this speech is not that old. It was just in May, right? But how many people are bringing up this stuff, talking about how it is that they are going to put this information in our heads ahead of time to make sure that we act accordingly before the interest rate cuts happen? They're not going to shock you. I guarantee you. There's no rates coming in September. I mean, they could come in September, but the communication is going to change if it does, right? They are going to make sure that everybody is well understanding that there is going to be a cut. And it may be a difference on how much, but they are not going to be confused about whether or not it's going to happen. Right now, everybody's confused about whether or not it's going to happen. That's a no rate cut. That's a no rate cut communication. All right, let's read some comments here, guys. All right, where are my glasses at? Here we go. All right, wow. I never get to catch UE live stream this early. Sweet. Yeah, well, that's what you get because the UE doesn't sleep. All right, hello, fellow insomniacs. Yes, hello, good morning. All right, love morning streams. Yeah, I think these morning streams are actually a lot of fun. These smaller crowds, I like bigger crowds. I love it when the stream gets up to 500-600 people. That hasn't happened in a while, but 200, 300, 400 people is a lot of fun. But these smaller ones, especially like the member only live streams, I really dig those things. I mean, the smaller group communications, they're the communication is just as good as when they're big. In fact, I think it's better because, we're actually getting into a conversation that we can have as opposed to just like reading random comments that are flying across the screen. All right. All right. Good morning, UE. Just got the notification. No one awake, bruh. Yep, we are. We're here. All right. One rate cut only, rate increases. Rate cut. Love morning streams. Okay, let's cruise down here a little bit. All right, I clocked out at 2 a.m. Should I sleep or nah, don't go in until 4 p.m.? Yeah, well, I'm going to be going in a few hours. What time is it right now? It's almost 3. Yeah, see, I got to be at work in 4.5 hours or so. My grandma is sleeping. Keep it down. Buy crypto, stake it, and forget about it. Buy more if it falls down. A coffee, a poop, and listen to UE, right? Oh, damn. And here I thought I got up early. I'm about to leave for my slave labor. That's disgusting. Oh, jeez. All right. Hit like on the way into the stream, please, everybody, because that will make YouTube share it more widely so we get more interesting questions in here. Thank you very much, Brody. Thank you for being here, too, man. So you don't sleep either. All right, man. Yeah, good morning. All right. What does that say? Dank podcast? Buy an electronic water kettle. Actually, I have an electronic water kettle that makes hot water. Like, really, those things are actually pretty cool. It's just like this water kettle that sits on the counter and you just hit the button and, like, I don't know, like less than a minute. I don't know, about a minute or something like that. It's got boiling hot water in it. It's really cool. Good morning. Hi, Simon. I'm just getting home from work. Good timing. Right on. It's great to see you guys. I couldn't believe how many people are actually awake at 2 o'clock in the morning who would join in on the live stream. It was like before I would think, man, ain't nobody going to be here. But literally right now, we're over 118 people watching with 58 likes. Go hit that like button. We'll see if we can get it up to 200 here. I'm beginning to think this guy lives in his car. No, man. Well, you can't really see it, but I live in the house like right there, man. I'm in my driveway. Funny because I was just listening to your video yesterday about we're losing our jobs to fight inflation. Yeah, and that's really ultimately the See, this is where, like, I think a lot of times also, like, the classical form of understanding economics. Like, this is why I'm going to say it. There's classical form, and then there's the new way of understanding it. Because once the Fed funds rate hit the lower bound of 0, everything changed, right? But nobody really knows it, and since nobody really knows it, the communication about it has a very big impact on the economy. And so the Federal Reserve learned that if they communicate about it right, they can get the economy to basically do the things that the interest rate adjustments would have typically had done. Right? And so understanding the classical form of how the Federal Reserve would operate, if they were looking for inflationary scenario, if they were looking to have inflationary pressures in the economy, they would try to lower rates. And when most people hear lower rates, they're thinking, okay, that's going to get people out there borrowing money to spend into the economy, which is true. I mean, that is like the base of what ends up happening, right? People see the lower rates and they buy houses, cars, and go on vacation. However, what's really deeper inside of the monetary policy that has taken place is that business investment is now starting to ramp up. When the lower interest rates happen, businesses borrow. When they borrow, they need to spend that money on something. They buy buildings, equipment, hire people, right? Once they start hiring people, the added new jobs to the economy is going to increase the consumption. More people working, more people earning more money, more consumption begins to take place. Supply demand imbalances begin to happen, and then the prices start to increase. Now, again, like lowering interest rates definitely sparks consumers out there, but really deeper inside of the monetary policy, what that's doing is creating jobs. Once you have created jobs, you'll create an inflationary pressure. Quite on the opposite of that, if they raise interest rates, business investment slows way down, hiring slows way down, less people working, less people spending money in the economy, and then you have inflationary pressures coming down. So, yeah, there's two aspects to looking at it. Most people, when they think of interest rates coming down, they only think of the consumer, whether or not they're going to be buying houses, cars, and going on vacation. But very rarely do they take into consideration what it is that the businesses, the corporations, all the, mom and pa's out there, what they are going to do with lower interest rates when it comes to their business and whether or not they are going to be hiring people. Like generally you're going to hire people because you see more consumers out there. So it's just like it's all kind of working the symbiotic kind of way. But really, that's how the Federal Reserve is looking for inflation, is to find more employment happening out there. If they want to lower inflation, they want to see the unemployment rising. And that's how they would typically operate. But since the classical form of stimulating the economy with lowering of interest rates and having more people working, like bringing in a tight labor force, didn't produce the inflationary scenario that they were looking for. You think about it, back at the end of the Obama administration, pretty much all the way through the Trump administration, and then leading into the pandemic, there was historically low unemployment. All right. Historically low unemployment. That everybody was bragging it up. We got the best jobs numbers in the history, right? But yet that failed to produce the inflationary scenario that would typically have come, because we understand it now. The classical form of how the Federal Reserve would operate within the economy and the adjustment of interest rates didn't work anymore, right? So even though we had low unemployment, which would typically be the inflationary scenario that the Fed would be looking for in order to, work their monetary policy, it didn't happen, right? Quantitative easing, 1, 2, 3, and 4, expansion of the balance sheet, all the money printing, all this low unemployment, all the stuff, still couldn't even get to 2%. Right? They failed it. Right? And so it's just understanding, okay, low interest rates, being at the close to zero, being low neutral interest rates, right? The return on capital investment going negative. Like this is all deflationary pressures when you're at the lower bound of zero. It's very difficult to operate. Now you have to screw with people's perceptions, because you have to have this inflation expectation within the people so that they will conduct themselves in a way that would actually create the inflation. Like if you thought that things were going to get cheaper in the future, would you go out and buy it now? No, you would wait for the future and buy it cheaper. But if you think that things are going to get more expensive in the future, would you wait? No, you would buy it now because you would believe that things are going to get more expensive in the future. So inflation expectation is actually stimulating to the economy at the moment. So if you have an elevated inflation expectation, you can get the people to react to that information and start participating within the economy. But if they think that there's going to be in deflation or recessionary pressure, then they back off and actually self-fulfill that prophecy by making it happen by not doing anything within the economy. So that making sense? What else are we going to talk about? What are you all laughing at? Okay. Funny because I just listened to. Oh yeah, we did that. All right. You should be sleeping. Yeah, I should. Aren't we all asleep? Yeah, I think we are. All right. Nope. I wake up at 5:30 Eastern for work. All right, so you're ready. Not all of us, apparently. I used to watch a guy who lived out of his van with his girlfriend and dog. He was psycho, she was fat, smoked weed, and drove around Stockton, California, sleeping in Walmart lots. That was 2018. I wonder what he's doing now. I got work at 5:43 minutes. All right. I wake up earlier than I need to so that I can continue my self-education journey. Can't do this stuff at work. Yeah. Do you have an air mattress in the back? No, I got a big old bed. Actually, I need a new bed. My bed is old. Actually, my youngest, Freddie, he has the newest bed and it's a nice bed and it's the most comfortable bed in the entire house and he sleeps on the floor. Like Freddie, he doesn't sleep in his bed, I mean, he'll go to bed, but then he wakes up on the floor or on the couch or anywhere else. Hit the like button, guys. Yes, please do so. We got 137 people with 67 likes. What else are we going to cover? What do you think the initial market reaction will be if the Fed cuts rates in September? But they're not. See, that's just the thing. They're not going to cut rates in September because that would be a shock and awe event, right? See, if there is a rate cut, ultimately it's going to be a non-event because the Federal Reserve would have communicated it so well in advance to the people out there and had them reacting to that information in such a way that the rate cuts had already taken place before they actually do it. And then when the rate cut happens, it's essentially nothing happens. It's just like one day transfers to the next, and they'll be like, yeah, everybody knew it was coming. They've already positioned themselves. All of it's priced in already. All of it's done, right? That's the way the Federal Reserve operates. Not a shock and awe event. That's the way they used to operate. And that's why so many people think that there's going to be a rate cut in September is because they are used to the Federal Reserve shocking them with the rate cut. That's not the way they do it. They changed that 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And in fact, they did it. They didn't even change that 4 or 5 years ago. They changed it over the course of the last 25 years. But it became very apparent, like after the great financial crisis, that that was going to be the main policy tool. And then come 2020, when the pandemic kicked in, it was full on. That point on, it was nothing but a credible threat theory, monetary policy guidance, because the interest rates are we're no way going to ever make it up to 5.5%. Not in the typical way that the Fed had operated. I mean, they tried doing it during the Trump administration. They got it up to around 2.5%, and it was just too painful of an experience for everybody. And they didn't have any real way of like saying, hey, we can stimulate the economy through money printing and all this other stuff. And they didn't have a reason for it. Right. So come towards the end of the Trump administration, the Federal Reserve was lowering interest rates to try and bring at least you know, some sort of support to the households and businesses out there, but it was leading right into a recession. Like everybody was calling it out. Like the Federal Reserve, when they start to lower rates, generally that leads you into a recession. Just go back and look at all the Fed funds rates that, you know, adjustments throughout history, and you're going to see that generally when they start to drop them, they drop them right into a recession. They're trying to fight off the recession ahead of time. They're acting preemptively or whatever. So I'm not trying to predict that that's what's going to happen this time or whatever, but that's what was taking place back in 2018, 19, when the Federal Reserve was trying to get their ammo back then, realized that it wasn't going to happen, started to try and bring some sort of support to the households and businesses, knowing that there wasn't enough room to really adjust, right? You know, dropping rates wasn't going to really do much for the economy. And then the pandemic kicked in. And so it's just like, oh, well, nobody knows exactly what they would have done without the pandemic, right? But, you know, they lucky for the Fed, you know, they had the pandemic and then all the money printing and all the stimulus and, raising of interest rates and inflationary scenarios and all the stuff that they desperately needed in order to save their monetary policy magically presented itself during the pandemic, which is like, it's not coincidental, right? It's not. Moving on. I bought an electric. Where's my glasses? I bought an electric low wattage water kettle for on the road for coffee and tea, even cup ramen. Really sick investment for camping too. Yeah, well, mine just plugs into the wall. It's just a 110 deal. But yeah, the kids like it too because it has the LEDs in there, so it lights up, and then you got the bubbling water with all this, blue LED lights shining through it. All right. Nice. Those great dark podcast. Yeah. It's awesome. Was so stoked to get it in the mail yesterday. I think whatever you did with your life between the eclipse between 2017 and 2004 matters a lot. Huge time portal to either make or break you as a person. You either grew or you're getting left behind. Yeah, well, in 2000, I mean, to be honest, in 2017, that's when I started this channel, right? That's when I'm in. What is amazing to me is I have actually found a lot of people who, like on YouTube, who started a channel and a journey almost about the same time that I did. Right? Like I found these other people who had these successful YouTube channels who were not too far off. They might have started within like a few months or a year of when I started the channel. And, here it is, like, I think that they've done so much more with their channels than I have. But then again, I think, well, that's just the meaning that we are all giving it. I think I'm doing I think I'm doing a lot with my channel. I think I'm doing a lot by sharing this, with the viewers out there, and having this communication, I think, is very impactful in a lot of ways for not only other people's lives but for my own life, my own personal journey here. So as I look at these other people, I think, wow, look how successful and all this money and mansions and cars and all this other stuff that they have. And I'm thinking, well, that's their journey. That's what they're on. That's what they're doing. I'm on a whole different aspect of life. Like I'm doing something totally different. And, I don't know, like maybe material possessions might have been important to those people. They're not to me. So therefore, I probably won't have that kind of thing in my life because I don't really care about that sort of thing. So it's not like, it's not like something that you should compare yourself to or anything like that. But I think it's just the idea that everybody was now moving in kind of like this particular direction at the same time. And like, go back, I find it years later, it's just like, wow, when did you start? Around the same time. Like something happened within the economy, within the people themselves that sparked, right? And started having people getting active and doing things. And you can see similar stories amongst a lot of people who didn't have anything to do with each other, didn't know each other in any way. Not even talking about the same subjects. Good morning, John. A lot of professional money managers don't understand what you understand, Simon, and they're going to pay through the nose for it. Yeah, and I mean, sometimes I mean, and I don't mean to discredit my information, but sometimes ignorance is bliss, right? Sometimes just simply not knowing gives you the ability to actually take chances in ways that you may not have taken because you're so in tune and understanding of what's happening. You know, may find that just like not studying this stuff and just kind of going with your gut instincts on everything might be the right decision too. So I don't necessarily think that everybody's going to be like in a bad position because they don't follow this, but I have a hard time believing that they are going to be making the right decision by not understanding this stuff, like I guess what I'm saying is just like it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be falling into bad times just because they didn't get this information. But I think by not having it is very dangerous for the idea that, you don't fully or aren't fully aware of what it is that's taking place. I mean, how am I trying to explain this here? Like sometimes so much information blocks you from actually taking action, right? You're like, whoa, there's too much. I needed more information before I actually make this decision. Where other people are like, I'm pulling the trigger. I don't care. I don't need to hear anymore. And so, there's two kind of ways of looking at that, right? You pay the buck, you won't regret it. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Brody. I really appreciate that, man. All right. I noticed this is like almost everybody up in here is members. Okay. All right. UE, along with interest rate cuts in the future, more than likely, what would cause the Fed to gradually expand their balance sheet once again? The balance sheet adjustment is going to be coming from the demand for the liquid. All right. So the Federal Reserve has the demand for their liabilities, which is essentially the cash, right? The dollars, the Federal Reserve notes. That demand for their liabilities exists far beyond what has taken place here in the United States. So when you have a demand for their liability outside of the United States, the demand for dollars out there, that is going to be the main reason why they would expand their balance sheet, is to create more currency, to create more reserves, to create more digital assets, whatever you, or digital dollar units, however you want to consider it. But that's the main reason why they would want to expand their balance sheet, is to create that liquidity to get out there to the rest of the world to meet that demand. So if the demand for their liability, for the Federal Reserve note or reserves or whatever, starts to increase. Now, why would that happen? It's because there's a lot of dollar denominated debt. That means countries like China or Turkey or Brazil or who else out there has issued debts that are due in dollars, right? It doesn't have anything to do with the United States, right? It doesn't have anything to do with them. But these contracts have been issued out in dollars, meaning that dollars are needed to pay them back. So when these debts all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but when these debts do come due, and at times a wave of them comes due because of the time, when they were issued to the time that they are coming due, just like anything, you'll have increase and decrease of these things. So when these things start coming due in a massive scale, the demand for dollars really starts to increase, and you'll find that the dollar strengthens in a much, much quicker fashion than is going to be suitable for the United States economy. So when the dollar strengthens, like our exports get very difficult, our imports start getting cheaper, it starts really messing with our trade balances. So this is another like impact to the United States. So when it comes to providing the world with liquidity, right, with the dollars, with the liability that the Federal Reserve is having to provide, how does the Federal Reserve do that? Right? How do they create all this money in order to meet this demand? Well, they got to find something to put on their balance sheet. Now, generally, it's U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. Like, that's the bulk of it. But they already know that they can't continue down this path of mortgage-backed security. Well, of buying these two particular assets. I shouldn't say that they can't do it or they won't do it, but what they have said is basically if they continue down this path of buying like U.S. Treasuries, they're going to put the government on an unsustainable debt path and they'll eventually fail. So they know they can't continue down that road. However, the world is still going to demand the liability, right? They're still going to demand the the Federal Reserve notes, the reserves, the digital assets, whatever that comes from the Federal Reserve, the liability of the Fed. The world's still gonna demand that, and the Fed's got to figure out what it is that they buy out there from the world in order to put on their balance sheet to create those digital assets, those liabilities. And ultimately, I think it's going to end up being foreign assets. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start picking up like foreign assets, foreign bonds that are issued in dollars. Like literally taking like an Australian bond that has, instead of being issued in Australian dollars, they're issued out in US dollars. I'm not saying that's happening. I'm just using it as a hypothetical, right? And then taking that bond, putting it on their balance sheet, and then issuing out dollars on account of that dollar denominated debt that existed out there. And that would really turn the Federal Reserve note into the new world order currency, right? Because then they could take the debt of the world and put it on their balance sheet and issued out the dollars. It would say, it wouldn't even have to say, United States of America note anymore on that. It could just say world, American note or world reserve note or something, kind of like, I guess, similar to way like the European Union would work. Maybe something similar to that. Not 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 exactly. Yeah. All right. I completely rely on gifted memberships. Well, Cody, we'll keep you here, man. I mean, because I think you're a good asset to have here on the channel. Cody's 13 years old and diving hard into this stuff. He's really committed himself to understanding like macroeconomics and has a good understanding of silver. Believes that silver is the best asset that an individual could buy, not only for securing your wealth but building your wealth as well. And he's done a great little PowerPoint presentation for it. And I think like he should keep going with that sort of thoughts and actions and energy. And I think you're going to do quite well, kid. All right, Simon. I would pay you the compliment of saying that your mumbles are very coherent. Thank you. All right. Uh, let's see. Dominic, economic shocks would, but they probably wouldn't need to respond to economic shocks in these conditions. There's still quite a bit of slack in the economy. Yeah. Chat isn't active today. Yeah. Well, we're 150, 84 people who have hit the like button. I think we're all just sitting around listening, trying to enjoy our coffee and waking up. Is the middle of the night for most people, I think. Yeah. 7 p.m. where I'm at. I am. Oh, yeah. I think we don't have Keynes' system anymore. If you read one of his books, you'll see that you will agree with most of his thinking, and we ain't got that for a pretty long time. Yeah, world world finances. Yeah, I agree with that. Like I'm not trying to defend like the Keynesian model or like the idea of it. Like I think we're in a whole like invented new world idea that doesn't, any kind of understanding of economics prior to this to where we are today is probably very confused about what it is that we have taken place. We have so many new changes to the economy that could never have existed even 30 years ago. Like, I mean, just the idea of negative interest rates would have been like some, like, no way, that ain't gonna happen kind of concept 30 years ago. Today, now it's a very, like, it's a very real thing, even though we're not close to negative rates or even, nobody's even talking about it. That's a very real possibility within the economy now because we have actually experienced negative interest rates, which is something that, again, like, 30 years ago, nobody would have ever believed would have or could have happened. So we have new strategies, new way of understanding things. And that's one of the important reasons for studying some of the older economic theories, like the four economic theories, Gresham's law, Triffin's dilemma, the Cantillon effect, and the bullwhip effect. By understanding these four economic theories, well, they're underlying economic forces that I think are still going to be active no matter what is happening out there within the economy. Like if you bring in negative interest rates, you got digital assets, you got all kinds of changes that are new innovations or new concepts to the economy. I believe those underlying economic forces will still be at play. And you have to recognize them for what they are. Most people don't recognize them, and then they try to find excuses or blame for the situation that they are observing. A lot of it, like, just seeing like the trade deficits or, like your manufacturing base leaving and going over to foreign nations. A lot of people just want to blame that on politics. Well, okay, yeah, politics is very much involved with it, but you also have to understand that it goes much deeper than just the politics of it, and that it was actually an underlying economic force that was driving the manufacturing out of the nation because it was been described hundreds of years ago and thousands of times throughout history that's how it goes. Right? And once you have raised your standard of living, your manufacturing competition or your manufacturing is no longer competitive against the foreign competition out there, and you end up losing it to them. And that's just the way it goes, no matter what you do. It's just the way it's going to go down. And understanding that then now alleviates the need to blame politics or to expect them to do anything about it. Like they can't do anything about it This is the way that it just rolls. It's like it's a cyclical thing, right? And so as that cycle rolls through and the abundance of money came, flowing into those who were producing and saving, that should have been redistributed back out. But we changed the way that the system is. And so now, we got rid of that gold standard. Instead of redistributing that wealth back out, we just have ever increasing amounts of new money coming in. So people say, well, yeah, all those economic forces no longer exist, right? Because we changed. No, they're still underlying. Right. So as that new money pours in, ever increasing amounts and inequality taking place instead of the redistribution of wealth that should have taken place. Right. That gold should have gone spreading back out there to the world, but it didn't. We concentrated and we kept it. Right. And so now with the new money coming in, we have this ever increasing amounts of inequality that happens, and people want to blame politics for it. It's like, okay, well, that's fine, but it's the underlying economic force that is actually creating the situation that's happening here. Yes, it was politics that severed us from the gold standard, that created this fiat currency and all this other stuff, but they are not in control of that underlying economic force that is separating the rich from the poor. That is going to happen no matter how you bring new money in. And until the day that it stops, then the redistribution of wealth will happen again. That again is the underlying economic force. There's nothing we can do. The politics can interfere with that, but they can't stop it from taking place. Right? I mean, just like the plane that's flying, nobody's really worried about gravity. Everybody's just worried about making it to the other side on time. But I tell you, as soon as the plane runs out of fuel, everybody will be worried about gravity. Gravity will be the number one concern. Right? But until then, the only thing they're worried about is time. Like, how long are we going to make it there on time? That's their biggest concern. So, how do you want to look at it? Like, when I'm flying in a plane, I don't really think about the gravity either. I mean, I'm looking at the view thinking, wow, it's so beautiful. Where are all the baseball fields? I like looking for baseball diamonds when I'm flying, because it's one thing you can actually identify from way up there. Yeah. But nobody really thinks about the underlying forces that have you like right at the very edge of death. Nobody, I'm not going to concern myself with that stuff right now. I just want to focus in on what I'm going to do once I get to the other side. All right. What time is it? 1 o'clock. Or not 1 o'clock. It's 1 hour into it. It's 3 o'clock. That's what time it is. All right, Simon, you're absolutely right. You're the only person I've come across saying these things, which is crazy. Right. And that's what gets to me, Brody, man. I mean, I appreciate you saying, wow, look at all these comments. Hey, cool. Got another member to the channel. Very much appreciate you joining. But that's what gets me, man. That's why I keep going over all this information. That's why I keep bringing it up and keep sharing it with you, is because I want to see other people talking about this stuff. I want to see it on the news. I want to see other YouTubers who dived into this information, grabbed a hold of the credible threat theory, took the information that I have and then gone really bananas with it and really figured it out. Because you got to think, guys, I am not somebody who's like a college graduated person. Like, I barely graduated high school. I stutter when I read because I had a I still do, really, but I'm overcoming a reading disability. I'm not the type of person who does like this kind of research and writes books and does like all kinds of stuff. I'm just some dude, right? But this stuff was incredibly intriguing to me. And when I started coming across this information, and I was just like, cool, when are people going to start talking about this stuff? And why aren't people talking about this stuff? Why aren't people talking about this stuff right here? And then I realized, man, nobody knows. Like, literally nobody knows. That's what's going on. Everybody understood the way they learned, but they didn't realize that there was a change that had happened, a strategy that had been taken in order to deal with the fact that their monetary policy was failing. Like, they can't explain that they were failing. If they explained that they were failing, people would have like abandoned them, right? They would have been like, okay, that's it, we're done with the Fed, right? So the Federal Reserve must communicate it in a way that leaves people with a lot of confidence, which means that they have to be very secretive about what it is that they are trying to do. Because if people really did understand that they were this close to failure, Yeah. I mean, in a real, like, if they really truly understood how close to failure they were, not just like saying like, oh yeah, hey, the Fed's close to failure. Did you know? No, really? How? Like, how did you know that they're close to failure? To understand that they were running out of monetary policy with the low neutral interest rate and the lower bound, and understanding and internalizing all this information is very difficult. And most people will never do that. And so therefore, it really just comes down to the communication of what's being told to them. And if they say, hey, the Fed's got this, we got your back, we're going to do this, we're okay, everybody's going to be like, okay. And if that's all the confidence they need, that's all the confidence they need. And then the thing continues to operate. So, yeah, like, I'm just down to the conclusion. The only people who really understand this stuff are the FOMC and the few people here at the Uneducated Economist, because nobody else is talking about it. If if it was like, I don't know, how should I put it this way? Like, if people did understand it, it wouldn't work. Like, it wouldn't even exist. That's the thing about it. Like, this none of this would have exists at all if everybody understood it to the level that we do. Like, it just wouldn't work, and so therefore it couldn't be here, right? But because people don't understand it, it now has the ability to be here. And this is what's really crazy about it, is that we are so unique. Like, nobody knows this stuff, right? And I think it's kind of comical when people say, well, what am I supposed to do with this information? And it was just like, man, you're doing it right now. Like, whatever it is that you're doing, you are doing it right now with this information. Even if you don't feel like you're doing anything with it, you are. Like, every time you go to the gas pump, every time you're going into the grocery store, every time you show up for work, you are using this information, whether you know it or not. Right? As everybody else is out there blaming Biden for inflationary pressures out there, you understand it for what it really is, and you can recognize it happening out there. Yeah, it's it's the way, it's the change of way you're living, I guess. What did I do with it? Oh. What else are we going to discuss here? We're an hour. What time is it? 3:30. How late am I going to stay out here? All right. If you own a house in full, if you miss your property taxes, it goes up every month and auctioned by the state after a year. They'll be sure to let you know after the property taxes go up by $3,000 if you miss property tax bill. I mean, I hear that, but I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm sure, like, you could probably go out there and find plenty of stories, but I do wonder how prevalent within the entire housing market are tax issues upon people. Like, are they literally kicked out of their house? Are they losing their properties? Is it all like such a burden with taxes that it makes it unbearable for them? Now, I have heard stories, like individual stories of like, it's just like, holy crap, your tax bill is as much as my house payment, right? And it's just like, how is that even possible? But there are places like that, and I can imagine there's some value of some homes that are pretty extreme that it would, have that sort of level of taxes to it. But I personally don't know anybody who lost their property or lost out on account of like back taxes, or, couldn't afford any more taxes or something like that. Like, I don't know anybody personally with that story. Even though I know they exist out there, I'm not trying to say that they don't, but I just wonder how prevalent they really are within the economy, as opposed to, stories of it occurring. All right. After hours of listening while playing video games, it clicked for me a few weeks ago. All right. You should do 4 hours. I blame Biden for making the US look like poorly conducted sideshow. And see, now I don't. I don't blame Biden for that. I blame the American people themselves. Right? I blame the American people themselves because they really don't know who it is that they are voting for. And because they don't really know who they are voting for, you end up with very much actors. That's what they are. They're actors. If you don't believe that they are actors as opposed to decision makers or anything like that, like there is no decision that they make that impacts monetary policy in a way that screws with their strategy that has been in place for going on decades and more, right? Like this monetary policy strategy, I cannot find being deviated by political influence at all. Like none. Even though as much as they try to and say that they're going to and push it around as much as they try, it doesn't do anything. Like they don't have an impact on monetary policy the way that people want them to. And so therefore, I don't blame presidents for any of that stuff, right? What I end up blaming is the American people themselves. See, like, here you go. Where did Biden go? Why? Like, he's still the leader of this nation. And he is gone. Like, gone. Like, where did he go? Who decided that he shouldn't be out there saying things anymore? Right? He's still the leader. Like, there shouldn't be a decision on whether or not he should be having a presence on the mainstream media or out there in the public. There is not, that shouldn't be a decision made by anybody or any organization or anything. He is the leader of the nation, and he should still be doing exactly what it was that he was doing prior to saying, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? He's still holding that position. But yeah, it's crickets. He's gone. Where did he go? Who decided that Biden was not going to be out there saying things anymore? Right? Because regardless of what it is that he is doing in the future, right now, he still holds that position and he should still be doing the same things that he was doing before that. But he has disappeared because the people who are truly in charge of the mainstream media presenting information propaganda no longer has a use for that. And in fact, it's better that nobody even pay attention to that anymore because it's going to cause more issues than just switching the attention over to these other two people who have no leadership. Right? I mean, one kind of has a partial leadership, right? I mean, vice president, but really saying as a vice president that you're going to come in and fix things and you're like already in part of like, okay, that doesn't make any sense at all, right? And then the other one's not a leader, right? I mean, it was at one time, but not today. And so now here the focus is being brought on these two people who have no leadership to, I mean, well, one of them kind of, sort of. The other one is asking for it, but neither one of these people are the leader of the nation. Everything's focused in on them, and the person who should be leading the country is nowhere to be found. Okay, yeah. I mean, tell me that this isn't manipulated and force-fed into the people. Tell me it's not. Right. That's why I laugh at this stuff, and I'm like, it's just like, wait a minute, no. Biden should still be up there talking. Even though nobody likes him, nobody likes what he says. He doesn't make any sense when he's speaking, but he's still the leader, right? He's still the leader of this nation. He should still be doing that. He should still be, leading the nation. Gone. Where'd he go? Who's leading the nation right now? Who's guiding? Whose voice is guiding the nation right now? Oh, I'm sorry. Mainstream media propagandized bullshit. That's what it is. That it has been the entire time. The entire time. Like, from the very beginning. I don't know how far back you have to go since we were little kids. Right? And so it's obvious to me now, just by him just not being there, right? That makes it so obvious to me. That here we are with no leadership whatsoever communicating to the public anything at all. Gone. Okay. Where's my Constitution? Man, I need that thing. Yeah, let me hold that thing a little closer to my heart here. All right. Let's cruise down here to the bottom. Is Simon talking politics? Why bother? No, I'm not talking politics. I'm talking about media propaganda. That's what I'm talking about. Simon, you're definitely correct on the puppeteers. Yeah. Biden in hospice. Yeah. Like, I don't know why I agree to pay taxes on a home I bought, so I still own it, but whatever. Yeah, I don't look at the house as something that I own. I think it is something like, I mean, I kind of think about it as something I own or something I'll have in the future that's going to be more of an asset that can pay me, but it's more of like almost like a business, kind of thing. I don't really look at it as like, oh, right, my home, something that we'll have forever and ever. And it's like, whatever, they'll just take it from me in the end. All right, UE is up super early. Yeah, how do you know I'm not up super late? ABC, CBS, NBC, turn off the TV. Yeah, it holds money. Actually, I don't think you should turn that stuff off as much as you don't necessarily have to believe it, but then, or observe it for what it really is. It's the message that they are trying to deliver about monetary policy. Right. So this is like the forward guidance that they're trying to deliver. Now, we understand monetary policy for what it really is, right? The neutral interest rate, average inflation rate over time, these sort of things that we are really internalizing and really focusing in on to understand what it is that the Federal Reserve is trying to do. But then if we look at the mainstream media and what it is that they are trying to communicate out there, we can see what it is that the Federal Reserve is doing with their monetary policy, because that communication is very important to what it is that the markets are going to do, right? So like if you're an investor, if you're doing like, that's important information on what it is you're going to do with your stock trades or, your business or, retirements or whatever it is you got going on, right? This is the information that you are needing in order to conduct yourself properly, but also knowing that the real FOMC's monetary policy when it comes to like, the neutral interest rate and flexible average inflation rate over time and stuff like that is a very different communication than the one that they have out there on the mainstream media. So I do feel that you should be paying attention to both of them, but one of them you don't internalize as the facts, right? Because this one's factual from the FOMC and what it is that they're attempting to do. But this one is more about the view that they want the markets to have, right? And so if you can understand what it is that they want for a view, you know how the markets are going to react to that, and you're going to know how to position yourself. Now, whether or not the Fed actually, so think about it, like how many people are positioning themselves with a rate cut in mind? That's incorrect. That's an incorrect way of going about it. Now, it may not play out to be incorrect, right? There very well could be a rate cut, and people are like, what are you talking about? They position themselves properly. But they didn't do it off of the information properly because the Federal Reserve has not promised a cut yet. But these people are acting as if it had. And they very well could turn out to be right with their prediction, but they're doing it off of a definite. They don't think that it's a possible, like they think it's a definite. And that's a difference, right? That's a huge difference inside of the way that people are going to react and use this information. So again, like, take it for what it is you're going to do with the info. But that's the way I kind of look at this thing, is that these are two different communications that are happening, and it's important to understand that one of them is there to guide the perception and the other one is the reality of the situation, and okay. My grandma watched movies on TV and muted everything else. I listen to radio. My brain is scrambled eggs. Nights in Satan's service. I have a relationship with God. What do you think about the yield curve inversion? Yeah, I think the yield curve inversion, I mean, that was, again, back understanding it from the classical form of the Federal Reserve, the yield curve inversion was a very good predictor of a recession once the yield curve had uninverted. And I think that whole idea really has really lost a lot of its ability to be a predictor. Mainly just because of hitting the low interest rates of zero, and those yields on those bonds have been really kind of controlled in a different fashion, considering the quantitative easings and a lot of the stimulus packages, especially now that you have the treasury buying back bonds. Those yields on those bonds on the maturities are really obscured comparatively to what the markets would have priced in, right? So like when you have the free market, right? When you have the market creating that inverted yield curve or that inverted yield curve, that's a different story than when you have massive amounts of federal government involvement and Federal Reserve involvement, right? So now you have these two different huge entities who are having a major impact on the yields of not only the treasury maturities, but then also the impact on the market itself and their participation within that market. It doesn't leave like a real good, clear understanding of what it is that the market is feeling about short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates because of this other involvement that is happening between the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. So if I haven't made that confusing enough, right, short answer on it is when you have a short-term yield that is higher than the long-term yield, that generally has investors nervous. Like in the investment community is like, I don't want to tie up my cash for a short term because I'm very nervous about the economic environment. And if you want my cash, you're going to have to give me a better yield for it. I want some return for my risk that I'm taking for tying up my money in the short term. Long term, not so nervous, but definitely nervous in the short term. So this is when you see the yield start to rise in that short term, which is now the inverted yield curve. So that's typical of what would end up happening there. Now, Alan Greenspan was asked that very question, and he said, yeah, it's a pretty good indicator of a recession, but then he likes to look at the spread between the 5-year and the 30-year. And he says when you see the 5-year, 30-year spread start to widen significantly or just start to widen in a major way, that is a very good indicator of good economic times ahead because that's showing corporate management's willingness to invest. So I kind of set the yield curve or the inverted yield curve idea, I set that one aside. SOM rule I set aside, right? Because between these two and the lower bound of zero and the low neutral interest rate and all that other stuff, I think those are I think they're not as powerful indicators as they once were or could have been from the past economic models that they use them from. Right. So basically, the SOM rule is like, having to deal with unemployment and the unemployment numbers over the course of a certain amount of time. But again, like I feel that the unemployment and how that would have typically, like a low unemployment would have typically created an inflationary scenario, didn't work. So again, like I don't look at unemployment or employment as being an indicator that is going to impact the economy like it once had in the past, because there was a time in the past that low unemployment would have created inflation. But since it doesn't do that, it's probably not a good indicator for other reasons as well. And so again, I'm not trying to say that it doesn't work. I'm just saying, hey, that's probably not as powerful of a tool as it once was. So all these things that we had looked at in the past, like yield curve inversions, the SOM rule, all the other indicators that would typically say, hey, these are recessionary pressures that are coming, I think could be like not necessarily like swept under the rug and forgotten about, but maybe set aside for a little bit and say, okay, they're not as powerful as they once were. It's like the potency of the medicine doesn't work, right, as it once did. And that's probably a better way to look at it. And it's easy to understand that because of what has happened with the lower bound of zero. Like all bets be off now, right? The monetary policy had come to an end, didn't stimulate the economy, unemployment wouldn't create the inflationary scenario. The neutral interest rate was not allowing the Fed funds rate to stimulate all this stuff was happening at this time. And so to look at those indicators and say, okay, well, what's going to happen next? It was just like, I don't think they work like they once did. Like they could again, and I'm not saying that they don't into the future now that the Federal Reserve does have an elevated Fed funds rate and you see the neutral interest rate beginning to rise. Those indicators might become powerful indicators again. Right? And I'm not saying I'm not saying to sweep them under the rug, but I just don't think they're as powerful as they once were. Give it time, higher Fed funds rate, neutral interest rate rises, and elevated inflation expectation. We do this for a while, and yeah, those indicators will probably become powerful again. All right. My state has shit ton of taxes, but they enforce laws, and it's a beautiful coast with high standard of living if you're rich. Yeah, I kind of have the same thing going on where I'm at. Rich people are running from high tax states to low tax states. Kevin, hey man, nice to see you. Kevin from Lakeland, Florida. Huey, do you want a jar of Vegemite? A pack of iced Vos postcards and an Australian silver coin. Cody, those things would be very cool. I've never had Vegemite. I've never had the Vegemite, and I know that's a really popular Australian thing, but yeah, it's funny to like watch Americans like look at Vegemite and kind of laugh at it and do this thing. But I actually watched a video of what was it? I think it was a Russian girl. And she was like, it was a Russian lady. She was like, probably in her 40s or 50s. And she had tried peanut butter for the first time. And she was like, oh my God, it's sticky and bland. But it's like, she was all grossed out by it. And I'm like, wow, peanut butter is like America's favorite little, sandwich spread. So yeah, I would love to try some Vegemite. Oh, and I don't have my coin with me. My mom gave me an Australian coin. I should show that to you. Mom gave me for my birthday, she gave me a 2-ounce, a 2-ounce. It was a $2 Australian coin, but it was the year of the dragon, right? So, it has this really nice dragon design on the back. And Australian coins, like, they're just so beautiful. They're incredible. Like the polish on the coin is so like intense. Like you could tell that if it was all the way across the coin, it would be like a badass mirror. But that's the way silver is. But these coins their detail on them is just incredible, and they're super nice. All right. It's not Nutella. If you use too much, it will ruin your morning. All right. What kind of Australian asks whether a foreigner wants a jar of Vegemite? Of course, Simon wants Vegemite. All right. This is hello from Florida. Vegemite tastes fishy and salty. Does it? All right. Good morning from Maine. All right. Good morning, Bitcoin Buddha. Cool. We're getting more people up in here. 173 and 113 thumbs up. I can watch CNBC to hear this crap. You wanted to help. It's all there, so it's fine. CNBC isn't bad. Mine didn't and still face the unavoidable. Let's cruise down here. Okay, down to the bottom. All right, heading out for work. You all have a good one today. Yeah, you as well. Dank podcast. Can BRICS nations undermine the world economy? Well, I mean, I guess they could. I mean, that's like a possible. But I think like the bigger question is like, are they going to be able to like, is that going to happen in like, is it going to happen in a way that like just all of a sudden we're going to find that we wake up one morning and America has been completely destroyed and now we got this BRICS nations that are taking over and they're in charge of all the stuff and all that. Like I think a lot of people are in this sort of fear or this idea that the BRICS nations are going to like take over or something like that. And I mean, I guess if you give it enough time, like I guess that could be a possibility, but you're going to have to see a few things take place in order for the BRICS nations to really take over, like to undermine the United States or the current system and collapse that and then be the new like the new world, right? The new world order. Which I mean the new world order, Um mainly you have to kind of understand, like, why did the United States achieve the level that it's at right now? So you have to think about like the path that it went down. And this could be a discussion that can go on for 2 weeks nonstop straight, right? But you really have to think like what ended up happening with the United States in the early days. Like we had a whole crap ton of people, whole bunch of people from all over the world come here, right? You remember, send us your weak, send us your poor, send us your uneducated, whatever. Send them all here to the United States. All these people, immigrants from all over the world, came to the United States and they had opportunity, right? They took their good ideas that they had from their homeland and they started sharing them with the other people who brought their ideas. And the innovations that started coming here to the United States was very profound. The Industrial Revolution that came to the United States and the massive, powerful production base, manufacturing base that we produced here was unreal. Like, unlike anything else that anybody else was doing around the world. Now, there was other nations out there doing a great job, Germany and all kinds of places. There was all places that were manufacturing, but not like what the United States was doing. Right? Between war efforts and, all kinds of disruptions that were happening inside of the global economy, the United States ended up being the manufacturing powerhouse. We were the safest, we were the biggest, we were the strongest, we were the one, right? And we were producing the world's greatest stuff. So as we were producing this stuff and sending it out there to the world was sending us their gold. Like that's what everybody was using for money, was gold. So we ended up with all this gold and we ended up raising our standard of living. So now we're in a position in which that we had the gold, we had the power, we had the higher standard of living, and we had control over everything. Now, holding on to that control is going to be very difficult going into the future, considering that the only way to hold on to that is to have new money that pours in. Now, that new money was no longer going to pour in because the manufacturing from the United States was no longer going to be able to extract any more gold from the rest of the world because we already had it. So that meant that our manufacturing base was going to deplete no matter what because we just couldn't manufacture and sell to the world. The world didn't have any gold to send us. This was the major problem that the United States was facing. It's called Triffin's dilemma. All right? This is where Triffin's dilemma really starts to kick in. So now the United States is like, crap. Now what? We have this higher standard of living. We're enjoying not only the manufacturing that we're doing here and distributing to the world, but we're also now enjoying the manufacturing of foreign production. And we're about ready to relinquish this gold to the foreign production out there. All right, because we're buying this foreign production. And if we do that, we're going to end up in the poorhouse. So sever the gold standard, and we're going to move into this fiat currency, and we're going to have new money pouring in. We're going to continue to maintain our standard of living, and the world is going to start being the manufacturer, and we're going to have to give up our manufacturing base. So now this is how the United States is positioned. As the world's issuer of fiat currency, everybody else wants to be a manufacturer, sell their products to whoever, it doesn't matter. The United States seems to be a major buyer of it. So any nation wanting to take on a position like the United States has as being like the powerful world reserve currency provider has to do something that they probably don't want to do. And that is They have to go into a massive amounts of debt issuance, and then they have to not be a manufacturer, but be an importer in order to get that currency out there to the world. So this is a very dangerous position for a manufacturing country or a producing country, much like the BRICS nations are. They want to be producers. They want to be producers and savers, and they want to sell their products to the world, and they want the world to send them money. That's what the BRICS nations want. The United States doesn't want that. The United States wants to be the debt issuer, meaning that the only thing they want to sell to anybody is bonds. When they buy the bonds, we get the money, we buy their production, we have a higher standard of living. We don't even have to manufacture it for ourselves. Right? So very different positions. Like the BRICS nations want to be the world reserve currency. Well, then they have to do what the United States is doing, because there's simply not enough gold or Bitcoin out there to handle all the transactions of everybody around the globe. There's too many transactions needing to be done, and there's not enough gold and Bitcoin in order to facilitate all that trade. But there is an unlimited amount of dollars that can do the trade. And that's the major difference inside of it. BRICS nations don't do that. They don't even want to try. Like they want to be the manufacturer, and they want people to send them gold and Bitcoin. Right? They do not want to be the issuer of debt, and they certainly don't want to be in trade deficit. So I don't see how they can undermine the United States. They don't even want to do what the United States is doing. Like they want to say, we want to take over, we want to do deals in our own currency, want to do all this other stuff, but not a single one of them wants to be the major debt issuer, and not a single one of them wants to be an importer. Right? They all want to be exporters, and they all want to be like producer savers, you know. And so I'm not worried about them. Like they don't even want to do what the United States is doing. So yeah, it's like there's no competition. Like I would also say, like, if they were competing in a way, but there's no, like, the BRICS nations make up, like, you know, an insignificant amount of the world trade. It's just like this little, I don't know what the exact number is, but it's like 3% of the world trade, and the dollar makes up like 65% or something. And it's just like there's no, like, it's 65%, and then the closest second is like so far away that you can't even see them. Like you would need a telescope to even, like, you know, see where the hell they're standing way back over there. They're like so far away from the United States. There's nothing that even comes close to even remotely saying, hey, we can be a competitor. That doesn't even exist. And all this stuff and talk about the BRICS nation, it seems to be very, I don't know, like embellished, or I don't know, like, it's not, I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, it's all propaganda because it's on the mainstream media, but it's pushed out there in a way that I think is guiding people's beliefs incorrectly. And in fact, the more I think about it, the more I realize that this is a benefit to the Federal Reserve, the BRICS nations are. Right? And a lot of people say it's a direct competition to the Fed. I don't believe that. I think this is actually a relief for the Federal Reserve. You think about it, the Federal Reserve is in a position in which that they have to provide the world with their liabilities in order to do transactions, that liquidity out there. That is a very difficult thing to ask upon the Federal Reserve to do, especially when they have no choice in the matter, and that these contracts are being issued outside of the United States, that is creating the demand for the dollars, and the Fed has, and the government, and nobody has any control over that. Like you can't stop you and me from creating a contract that is due in dollars. You can't stop that from happening. But that action that you and I take will increase the demand for dollars, because you and I have done a contract inside of a dollar denominated debt that doesn't have anything to do with the United States, except now the pressure is on the Federal Reserve to provide the liquidity to make that contract happen, because it's going to strengthen the dollar if they don't. All right? See, now this is the problem that the Federal Reserve is facing. So if the BRICS nations are like, hey, you know, screw the Fed. Let's just do deals on our own with our own sovereign currency. And the Fed is just like, I don't have to provide the. Thank God. Right? You know how difficult it is to try and provide the world with the with the dollars and for your dollar denominated debt. You know how hard that's been. We're sending the United States and into an unsustainable debt path. Really, the only thing that we have out there of any kind of size is mortgage-backed securities, which is screwing up our housing market over here. And you're saying that you're going to start doing transactions on your own and you don't need the Federal Reserve's liability? Talk about a relief. Now the Federal Reserve could focus in more on the monetary policies of the United States or the economy of the United States and not have to stress so much about the world's liquidity demands. Because the BRICS nations are trying to alleviate some of that pressure, which is just a tiny little bit. But any little bit helps, you know? And that's where I think the Federal Reserve is truly positioned on the BRICS nations. You want to read something really interesting? Go and check out dollar funding stresses in China. We did again, member only video. You can go and check it out for yourself, $1 a month. But it's called Dollar Funding Stresses in China. And they address this exact topic of how much dollar denominated debt exists in China and how much of a burden that is on China. And then what China did to other nations with dollar denominated debt, putting other nations into debt using dollars. Like, this is China using the dollar as a weapon itself against other nations. Doesn't have anything to do with the United States, right? And China was just like, oh yeah, if the dollar strengthens, hey, we're going to be in the money. And this is China doing this to other nations out there. All right. Glenn, right on. Member for 19 months now. Wow, Glenn, thank you for being here this whole time, man. That's awesome. Thanks, UE, for insights. Off work I go. All righty, Glenn, man, thank you for being here. Where are we at? Okay, guys, we're almost 4 o'clock into this. Calling 6 on the die. It's too early, UE. I can't see the dice. Do you think the World Economic Forum and their agenda is a threat to the dollar? No. Nope. I don't think anything's a threat to the dollar. The only thing that's a threat to the dollar is, well, I mean, eventually it will run its course, right? So, but I think that's going to be the natural consequence of a debt-based currency, is that eventually it will come to an end. But I don't feel that any of the New World Order type of people out there are going to do anything to except for increase its demise a little. Like, I mean, I think they have a big impact as far as our observations go, but I don't think they have a big impact on the fact that it's going to take place and it's going to continue to take place. Like, I think what we observe from like things like the World Economic Forum is the natural consequence of what has happened with the fiat currency. Ultimately, like, there is going to be a clown at the show. All right. And that's it. This is what you see, and it was just like, so anyway, I don't think the World Economic Forum is a threat, because I don't know what it is that they threaten me with. Like, I don't know. Like, I would need to have, like, somebody needs to be like, dude, I'm about ready to shoot you. Right. That's a threat to me. But somebody was just like, you know what? They're going to do this to you. And it was like, oh, really? Yeah. Come on by, man. Come on by. Because I don't take words as threats, man. That's not a threat to me. You better show up. That's a threat. And you better show up prepared. Right? So that's a threat. Other than that, I can care less. Right? I could care less about your words. That doesn't mean anything to me. Yeah. When it comes to, they're going to do this to you. Okay, come on down. Right? I'll go put some coffee on. Let's go see this happen, right? So I'm not scared. You're going to own nothing and be happy. It was just like, you know what? I already own nothing. Let's just do the happy part of things. right? You're going to promise me to be happy? Cool, man. That sounds good. Right? You're going to own nothing. Okay. All righty, man. I already own nothing. I don't need your threats. I don't need you to tell me I'm going to own nothing. It's like, that's a good one, man. Yeah, you're going to own nothing. All right. I mean, I find that so comical. Obviously, they don't know who I am. I don't care about material possessions. So you're going to own nothing? That's fine. Now what you going to threaten me with? I don't care about owning anything. Yeah. So I find that very funny. I find that super comical that they're going to threaten me with you're going to own nothing. And it was just like, well, I'm already one step ahead of you. I already own nothing. Yeah, that's cool. All right. I own a 30-year mortgage. That's cool. All right. I mean, I'm in debt already. That's not ownership. So I don't own anything. I have a couple of old cars, like some clothes, some tools. Like I don't own anything. Yeah. You're gonna eat bugs. And it was just like, nah, I live in the Pacific Northwest. There's tons of food around here. I don't eat bugs. Like, I mean, I might eat bugs, but I'm gonna do it by choice, I'm not gonna do it because I have to. And they might be grinding up cricket flour and putting it in our food in the future. I don't know what to say. I mean, if that's the case, I'm going to look for that ingredient, and try to avoid it as best I can. But I'm not going to be like somebody who's just like worried about eating bugs and owning nothing and, having some new world order, authoritarian position coming down on me. I don't even think about that. Like, that is so far from anything that I have rolling around inside of my head and in my gut and stuff like that. No. See, there was a time I did. There was a time in the past in which that I did fall into that stuff. And I was very much a conspiracy theorist on the gluten, New World Order taking over and all kinds of the globalists and all that other stuff. And I'm not trying to say it isn't happening. That is happening. Right? That is happening. Here's the problem with it. None of that information did anything for me. Except for depression. It caused me to be in depression. So, I guess if you like being depressed, then that's good information to go through. And I'm not saying that it isn't something that you shouldn't be aware of. Like, I think you should be aware of the situation of it. And if you don't know anything about it, then you're going to have to dive into it at least some. But once you are aware of its existence, that's it. There's really nothing else you can do because the information that you get from them cannot possibly, from that realm of understanding things, like diving deeper into proving that they exist. What does that do for you? It doesn't do anything, right? Understanding the FOMC, monetary policy, interest rates, where things are going to go for that does impact your life. You can make decisions based on that, right? But you can't make decisions based on what those guys, those globalists are doing. Right? You can live in a fear-based mindset, but there's no information in there that's going to, make better business decisions, better retirement decisions, and none of that stuff. That doesn't exist in there. But it is quite entertaining. And, I used to follow Alex Jones for a long time, and, man, he would make that stuff super entertaining. All right, let's check it out. Phil with the $1.99. Next month cut will happen, but not 100 basis points. I don't think so. And the reason why is because it hasn't been clearly communicated. Right? It's going to take a clear communication in order for there to be a rate cut. They're not going to shock the markets with a surprise cut saying like, the September, are they going to cut or they're not going to cut? We're going to have to find out at the meeting. That's not the way they'll do it. The meeting will be about how much the rate cut will be. But the idea of the rate cut will definitely be put into the markets ahead of time so that they can position themselves well in advance of the rate cut so that there is no shock event to the markets. That is very important. Communicating, like I'm going back to the speech, communicating a policy strategy and following through on it increase the credibility of the central bank and therefore the ability to steer expectations in the economy. Right? Clear communications. It's very important, right? That if they were to shock the market, that is not a clear communication. So the communication that is going out right now is a no-cut communication. Right? Give it time. Like, we may get closer to September and that communication may change. But so long as they have a wait and see, data dependent, possibly on the table, that communication is a no-cut communication, because you cannot possibly use that information to position yourself ahead of the Federal Reserve doing their thing. Right? That's not what they're doing. They are clearly communicating it out there. So they will say it. We are going to cut at the next meeting. What they may not tell you is by how much, but they will definitely do it so that the markets will be there in position when the cut happens. It'll almost be a non-event. That's very important to understand, because this is the way that they conducted themselves now over the last, really since the great financial crisis, but really over the last, 6-7 years, and especially over the last 4. This is the communication of the monetary policy that guides the markets, not the interest rate adjustments. They don't work nearly as well. Where's it at down there? Kyle, thank you so much for the $1.99 for the super sticker there. All right, Gus, so they tell us. Morning, Simon. What is it there? 4 a.m.? It is 4:03. No rate cuts this year. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say there's no rate cuts. I'm just saying there's no rate cuts at this time, right? Until they communicate that there is going to be a rate cut, they're not going to cut it, right? And then we may even find next week or the week after or something else. I don't think that to be the case, but we could. Is all I'm saying is just like, if the information or the data was to change and then the Federal Reserve started coming out with saying, hey, we are going to cut at September, we're just not sure if it's going to be a quarter point or a half a point, right? We just don't know what it is that we're going to do here at the next meeting, but there will definitely be a cut. That's the communication style. Now, it may not be so clear as that, right? But it's going to be something of that nature, right? And like right now, people have committed themselves to a September rate cut, but the Federal Reserve didn't communicate that, right? They said it was on the table if these conditions, right? That's very different from, yes, we are going to cut at the next meeting, we just don't know by how much. That communication is a rate cut communication. What we have right now is a no rate cut communication. They had 4 rate cuts planned this year, haven't done one yet. They didn't have 4 rate cuts planned this year. See, again, the communication that was being presented to the people through the mainstream media said that there was going to be 4 rate cuts, 7 rate cuts, all based off of this dot plot from back at the end of last year. Never once, not one time and I follow the Fed really closely. Like, I listen really closely to their words because, I find every single word that they say very impactful, depending on which way it comes from and how it is that they are using it. I have been listening to the Federal Reserve not only through the mainstream media, but through their communications to the other central bankers, through their speeches and, other documents that they have given. Not one time have I heard them talk about a rate cut. Right? Not once. They talked about the idea of having rate cuts in the future, but not once did they say, hey, we have rate cuts in mind. Not once. The interpretation that people had from some of the communications, like the dot plot and, even just Jerome Powell saying that it's on the table, these things are misinterpreted. They hear rate cuts are on the table, and that's the only thing they heard. They didn't hear the preliminary part that says if employment, if, inflation, if, then they're on the table. And all they heard was, hey, they're on the table. And they're like, didn't you hear all the ifs ahead of time? No. Nope, didn't hear a single if. Right? All they heard was on the table. So they start acting as if it's on the table. Very much like the dot plot had predicted 7 rate cuts or something like that for 2024. The dot plot is a form of communication that the Federal Reserve set up back when they knew that they were going to be running into the lower bound of zero and needed some way to get information out there to the public about what it is that they needed them to believe for monetary policy. The dot plot is not a predictor of where interest rates are going to be. What that is saying is that if these conditions that we are in right now was to continue, this is what interest rates would need to be. Guess what? Conditions never stay the same. Ever. There is no way that by the time that when the timeline gets there to now say, okay, your rate cut should be here, the conditions will have changed. Guaranteed. Zero doubt in my mind. Like the dot plot is really like it's BS. It's complete BS. That's what it is, right? I mean, it's just giving you a snapshot of what it is that would be taking place right now if this was to continue. But it's crap because it doesn't stay the same. So it really doesn't mean anything. You know, the dot plot means zero to me. All it does is give like a bunch of mainstream media talking heads something to talk about. And it totally works. I mean, it totally works, you know, as far as that. Because look at all the people who started acting accordingly to the dot plot, believing that there was going to be 7 rate cuts. I mean, even like the comment was saying, hey, they had 4 rate cuts scheduled. No, they didn't. They didn't have a single one, not one rate cut. Not that I can find, not in any of the communications that I found from the mainstream media all the way down to the central banking communications to each other. Never once did I ever hear about them doing a rate cut for the last year. Right. The idea is it up there, but no commitment to any of that. Right? The market commits to it. They take it. Well, it's on the table. They said it was on the table. I committed my decisions because Jerome Powell said that they were on the table. But you didn't hear all the ifs that led up to that, which basically said that there was nothing on the table. Right? And that's the major difference that is now taking place, is that mainstream media is not right. It's not communicating the real monetary policy coming from the Federal Reserve. If they are not talking about neutral interest rates, if they are not talking about flexible average inflation rate over time, if they are not talking about, I don't know, like all the stuff that we talk about here on this channel. Like I can't even, like to me, all that stuff that they communicate out there, it's obviously incorrect. Every time I hear an economist say, well, they're almost to their 2% goal, and it's like, no, they're not. They are not even close to their 2% goal. The 2% goal is a 2% average, a flexible average inflation rate over time with no mathematical formula for figuring it out. How could they possibly tell me that they're at their goal? This economist has no clue of what the hell he's saying if he says that the Federal Reserve is almost achieving their goal. The Federal Reserve doesn't even know what their goal is. They don't have a mathematical formula for figuring it out. So how can this guy who's not working for the FOMC, who's not communicating about the neutral interest rate, who is not communicating about flexible average inflation, rates or flexible average inflation targeting, and yet he is going to say that the Fed has almost achieved their goal? What? No, I don't think so, man. I don't think so. Sorry, bro, you're out, right? That's not, and this is the way that like most of them are, All right. They won't wait till too late to cut 25 basis points as snack. They won't wait till too late to cut. Yeah, no, they will wait till too late. In fact, they said that cutting too early would be a grave mistake. Here, let me see if I can find it. Hold on one second. Okay, Waller on let me see, when was it? Okay. Okay, there we go. Let me go and pull this up. This is July 17th, 2024. This is given by Christopher Waller. The speech is Getting Closer. Again, members only. All right, members only. We covered this exact speech shortly after he had given it. Now, this is what he has to say about inflation. On the one hand, it is essential that monetary policy get inflation down to a sustained level of 2%. Sustained level of 2%. This is the average inflation rate over time that they are talking about. If we start to loosen policy too soon, okay, remember, this is just like, what is today? Like less than a month ago that he had said this, right? So this is like 3 weeks ago. This is what he had to say. If we start to loosen policy too soon and allow inflation to flare up again, we risk losing credibility with the public and allowing expectations of future inflation to become unanchored. This is if they cut too soon. The credibility has helped inflation fall as quickly as it has, and in the past 18 months, and squandering it would be a grave mistake. Talking about cutting too early, squandering this cutting, this idea would be a grave mistake. Right? The other risk is that we wait too long to ease monetary policy and contribute to significant economic slowdown or a recession with unemployment rising notably. So what does he say about cutting too early? It'd be a grave mistake. What does he say about cutting too late? That waiting too long would contribute to a significant economic slowdown or recession and unemployment rising. But he doesn't say it would be a grave mistake. He says cutting too early would be a grave mistake. And again, this is just 3 weeks ago. Voting member of the FOMC, Christopher Waller. See, I don't care what they say in the mainstream media. This is the communications to the other central bankers out there. Right? This is far, far more accurate to what they're going to do with their monetary policy than the media propagandized information. So, all right. Fed following 2-year yield. They're always behind. We're below 4% now and falling. They don't cut until something breaks, but the 2-year is what they follow. All right, BG, I've been, again, like you, I'm not trying to knock your information or say anything different, but nothing within their communication says that. Right? I'm just saying, like, I mean, they might use some indicators out there as far as what it is that they're looking for. I don't find that here in their communications. The mainstream stated cuts to keep people feeling better, making more suckers. Goes to show you so many are dependent on low interest to keep the fragility moving along. Yeah, but here's what I find interesting is that the interest rates have been elevated for a while. They don't need them. Like we're moving along right now with elevated interest rates. Now, I'm not saying that it's a good time or that it, may not have its impact here in the future and create the downturns or whatever, but right now people are getting along with the higher interest rates. I mean, there are mortgages being written, not nearly as many. It's not nearly as good. Downturn in the market's happening, right? In all kinds of ways. But I don't see where builders are stepping up to provide more inventory to the housing market. So, higher interest rates don't seem to destroy the economy in which that a lot of people thought they were going to. Not yet, anyhow. Give it time, and I think the return on capital investment could actually create inflationary pressures from the higher interest rates. Yeah. Here. I'm going to go now. Bye, guys. See you, Cody. They had to get rid of the gold standards because otherwise the capitalism would be collapsed at 1970. Well, unfortunately, capitalism ended in 1913, so that was really when capitalism came to an end. To blame capitalism back in the 70s is really kind of you know disingenuous, considering that everything that they were doing at the time was very socialistic, right? I mean, that's what's happening. Like, they didn't allow capitalism to work. Capitalism to work would have meant that failure and redistribution of wealth and allowing people to rise and fall on their own merits. That's capitalism. But when you have severing of the gold standard, when you have social safety nets that have been issued out, when you have all this other stuff, no, that is the exact opposite of capitalism. Capitalism no longer exists, and what you have is some sort of form of crony capitalism, but more socialistic, communistic powers that are now taking over. See, that's really the problem that we're facing, is that we have communism that is blaming capitalism for its own fuck-ups. That's what's going on, right? So every time that the economy fails, you blame capitalism, even though capitalism is trying to fix your problems, right? It's trying to say, hey, these people who have risen off of all this is failing. You need to let them fail. And they say, well, if we let them fail, they're systemically important. And, we got to have, these systemically important companies exist. Well, that's socialism, communism. You can't do that, right? So they screwed up. They need to fail. Can't, systemically important, that's not capitalism. That none of that is capitalism. So we don't have capitalism. We never have. Like, we've never experienced capitalism in this nation for over 100 years. Well over 100 years. And every time capitalism tries to come up and fix it, they smash it in the face and say, oh no, you're the problem, bro. Right? You're the problem. We need to save these systemically important banks, and we need to have all these golden parachutes, and we need to separate the rich from the poor even more because, it was your fault. It was your fault, capitalism. That's right. Even though you really haven't been here to fix anything because we won't allow you to be, but it's your fault. I just love it. I love when people blame capitalism for stuff because it doesn't exist. It's like blaming the boogeyman. It's like blaming the Easter Bunny. You know who did it? It was the Easter Bunny who did it. That's who did it. And it's like, I find it comical. All these speeches, man. All these speeches. And they tell us all right there. Well, last check, communism 2, the definition. Maybe we can talk about socialism in some country, but communism, I know no country where the people directly owns the mess of production. The dang Easter Bunny, I know, it's the Easter Bunny who did it. When do smoke nights sleep? Glad I checked. Oh, when does smoke nights? It's not smoke nights, it says Simon nights? Is that what it says? Simon nights? If had my own capitalistic failure in the past. Okay. They will cut by 25 points in September, but that's it, as inflation will still come down and at a lower interest rate. I don't agree with that, Phil. I don't think they will. Like, I mean, they very well could, but at this point, the communication says no rate cut. Right? The communication doesn't say a rate cut, it says no rate cut. And the reason is because they're not going to shock the market with a rate cut. And right now, that would be a shock because people are not, like, when you have the Federal Reserve saying they are data dependent, then that's a no rate cut communication. When they say, yeah, we're going to cut, we just don't know by how much, that's a cut communication. That is a rate cut communication. So right now they're in a no rate cut communication, and I haven't seen that change yet. Like, give it some time. We may find that communication changes, but at this point, that's not what I see. I see no rate cut coming in September. And again, it would be a grave mistake to cut too early. Yeah. All right. I've had my own capitalistic failure. We already read that one. All right. Thank you, infamous NYC, for the $5, man. All right. The biggest business that run the country are all publicly traded as yet. So yes, the people own the means of production. Yeah, and I agree in that sense, right? That they do. But the moment that you have a too big to fail, or the word systemically important, right? That's the end of capitalism. Too big to fail and systemically important are not are not things that exist in a capitalistic realm. It's just, that's it. And so, I mean, I mean, it may not be necessarily defined as socialism or communism, but it certainly cannot be defined as capitalism. And to blame capitalism on that would be like incorrect, right? Now, I do agree in the sense that, yeah, the people do and can own the means of production, but really, how many people own stocks? Like, how many, like, really inside of how, like, the average general everyday worker out there, I mean, they own some, but they probably don't own an insane amount, right? Or I shouldn't even say an insane amount, like a significant amount. If they don't cut rates, Wall Street will have a hissy fit. No, they won't. They had the hissy fit believing that there was going to be a rate cut, and you saw the stock market crash and the bond market all of a sudden rally, and people came to their senses a few days later. So the hissy fit was already thrown off of the idea of it. Off of the rate cut, they threw a hissy fit. So what will end up happening is that when the Federal Reserve goes to cut rates, because it's a credible threat theory, they will communicate it well in advance. They do not want to shock the markets. And that's exactly what will end up happening if they do a rate cut in September and surprise everybody. We do have socialism. Under socialism, lack of true private property. Just look at most basic housing. You never own your home. Right? Absolutely. Rick, I really doubt that matters much to the Fed. What is Rick talking? What did Rick say? I can't find Rick's comment. Oh, well. Just woke up. Good morning, everyone. Hit the like button. Hey, thanks, Tim, for being here. All right. You can't stoke inflation by raising interest rates if no one has cash and everyone is in debt. John, I think you're misunderstanding how it is that higher interest rates can actually create an inflationary scenario, and how low interest rates actually creates a deflationary scenario or a disinflationary scenario. So let's kind of look at it from Dr. Lacey Hunt's point of view, right? Because he's the one who really has this information in a much, much better fashion. And I don't think necessarily Dr. Lacey Hunt has his predictions right as far as the outcomes from some of the stuff, but what he is talking about as far as the current situation, I think is very accurate. And now, when you have low interest rates, what you have is a very low return on capital investment. In fact, your capital investment can turn negative, meaning that you lend money out there, the return on that money does not beat the inflationary scenario. So let's kind of like just take this back a little bit and understand it from like when interest rates were high back in the early 80s, right? So you can lend the government $1 million. Say, you had a rich uncle pass away, left you with $1 million. You took your $1 million, you lent it to the United States government by buying 10-year treasuries. You would get a return of somewhere around $150,000 a year. That's a pretty good income for $1 million investment. I mean, you can take $150,000 a year and go and buy houses, cars, and go on vacation and spend it all into the economy, start businesses, or do whatever. That's a decent return on it. Well, you take that all the way up into the late 2018-19, right? And then going into the pandemic when they dropped interest rates to zero, now that $1 million investment that goes to buying 10-year bonds might have a return of $20,000. Like today, it would even be like what, $38,000, $40,000 for $1 million investment. A $30,000, $40,000 a year, like that's a lot of money, but it's not like, that much money. Not like, back in the early 80s getting $150,000 for your investment to the government. Now you only get about $40,000. So the return on capital investment has dropped dramatically. And because of that, you can't really necessarily move that money right back into the economy again because there's not that much of it. Not like there was back in the early 80s. Okay? So now as time gone on and we took interest rates all the way down to zero, well, now you loaned your money to the government at 2% yield or even less, a 1% yield or whatever. So now you get $10,000 off of your $1 million investment to the government. Like $10,000 of a $1 million investment, like that hardly even beats the inflation there. Like you got a negative return on capital investment because the $10,000 didn't even beat the inflationary scenario. All right? Because you got a 1% return and inflation was 2 or 3% or whatever. Right? So now all of a sudden your purchasing power is going negative because you have lent it to the government at low interest rates. This is a low interest rate environment. This is the problem that the United States was facing after quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everybody thought for sure it was going to create a hyperinflation scenario. I know, I was one of them. Didn't even come close. All that money printing at a low neutral interest rate, at a low interest rate, was failing to produce the inflationary scenario that we would have typically expected. Back in the early 80s, right, interest rates at 15% had a return of $150,000 on $1 million investment to the government. Lots of economic activity was produced from that. See the difference that's happening? See, people, just because the interest rates are lower, everybody seems to think that that's going to stimulate the economy. That is not necessarily the case. At first, yes, it does, but it's a flash in the pan, right? If you need economic activity to be persistent within the economy, higher interest rates is what is needed. Cantillon, right? Cantillon. Address this, right? Go and read Cantillon's essay, right? It's not that hard. It's not that big, right? I mean, I got through it. I don't read that much. I got through it. And what does Cantillon say about interest rates? When you have economic activity that is very prevalent within the economy, then what you will find is the entrepreneurs are going to be demanding money to buy materials to participate in the economy. Those entrepreneurs and their demand for money is going to cause the interest rates to elevate. So a fast-moving, hot economy has higher interest rates in it. But when the economy slows down and the entrepreneurs are like, hey, man, I'm not into this. I don't need to borrow any money because I'm not going to be buying material to participate in any of this because nothing's going on here. I'm backing away. Well, then the money lenders, the people who have money, are looking for a place to loan it. They can't find anybody. So they keep dropping the interest rates, hoping that somebody's going to borrow their money. That's what's happening in a slow economy. This is the way that Cantillon described it from way back in the day. We have become so in tune to what the Federal Reserve is trying to do out there with the economy that they drop interest rates and we think that that's stimulating, right? They're dropping interest rates because the economy has slowed down and that things are not active and they're trying to get activity to take place. Right? And all else being equal, the opposite happens when they have interest rates elevated, is that they have a lot of economic activity that is happening out there. Quite opposite of what it is that people think. Okay. I never seen someone try to make a career as a thinker while reading so little. It's amazing. Well, the thing is like, how do you know how little I read? I said I don't read a lot of books out there. I read constantly every single day. Okay? So it depends on what it is that you're reading. And just because I don't read books doesn't mean that I don't read, right? There's a difference inside of that. All right. I own and run a business and can barely get price increases. A little, not nearly enough. Understandable explanation. Thank you. Some of these people are too dumb and will never understand. And this is also what I find interesting is that, once you have come to the understanding of the economic forces that are happening out there, how much do you really need to hear from other people about how the economy works outside of those economic forces? Like everything is like I've studied this stuff for a long time and I've listened to a lot of politicians over the years and I've listened to a lot of economists and all kinds of, ideas and theories and stuff. And I find that most people are sharing their opinions, but very rarely do they ever actually understand the economic forces, the natural economic forces that are taking place. Like, especially when it comes to like, just even like the manufacturing base here in the United States. How many times have you heard that politicians or greedy corporations or whatever are sending our good manufacturing jobs overseas? How many times have you heard that? I mean, I've heard it my entire life, right? But nobody has ever explained it that says, hey, the higher standard of living has now created a situation in which that those manufacturing jobs, those good manufacturing jobs, are no longer competitive, considering that the foreign production over there is going to do it a whole lot cheaper. Now, we can get mad about that. We can get mad at politicians and saying, hey, you need to do something about that. But this guy explained it hundreds of years ago. So why are we getting mad about it or trying to pretend that it doesn't exist? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We know what's going on, right? This is going to happen. Separation between the rich and the poor is going to continue here in this nation so long as you have new money coming into the system. The moment that you stop having new money coming into the system, everybody falls into poverty and misery. So which one do you want? Yeah, it sucks watching these greedy corporations, these greedy individuals, these rich elitists, whatever, separate themselves from the rest of society is part of the way that it works. It's not like, I mean, it might have been set up for them that, or like, it might have been set up in a way, right? But this is the natural economic forces that are going to be prevalent within the economy so long as you have new money coming in. People, they want to pretend like they don't, like that doesn't exist or that doesn't happen or that there's some way that we can prevent it from happening. Like, why would that be? Like, you want to pretend like natural economic or the natural forces out there, like, trying to stop the tide. Like, are you going to stop the tide from changing? Of course not, right? You can't stop the tide from changing. You can't stop the sun from coming up or going or setting at night. You can't stop these things. And so to believe that you can stop like these economic forces that are happening or anything else, like that's like it's not going to take place. So why try and fight it? Just understand it for what it is and position yourself to deal with it. Ride the wave in, right? Or let the tide carry you out, which way, however way you want to go about it, right? It's just like, it's more about being than it is about trying to manipulate. Because that's what I think a lot of times, like, people misunderstand. And the reason why they're actually suffering a lot inside of the economy is because they're actually trying to manipulate the universe, right? No, it needs to look like this. My business operates, politicians, all these other people, they need to conduct themselves in a way that makes my business operate like this because this is the way that I understand it. You know how egotistical and manipulative that is? Right? And you wonder why it is that you're not getting the results that you want. It's because you're a manipulator. That's exactly what that is. It's a manipulation tactic. So to understand, hey, I need to be, I just need to exist inside of this. I need to flow, right? I need to be part of it, part of the process, right? Things are changing. I need to adapt to the change, right? Yeah, man, I was killing it at one time and doing what I do, but things are not that way anymore. We're not going back to that way. I need to change the way that I'm doing things and find a new way to kill it, you know, and that's life, no matter how we do it. But most people don't want to look at it that way. They want to say, hey, no, I have this going on. I can't adapt. I don't know how to adapt. I don't know what to do to adapt. So instead of adapting, I'm going to be pissed at politicians. I'm going to be pissed at everything else because my system that I had no longer functions within this. And that isn't right. I worked hard on building this thing. That's the unfortunate consequence. Right? It's like, it's very manipulative and egotistical to think that, politicians or bankers or anybody else is going to change the way that things are being done there so that your business can operate. It doesn't work like that. And it never will. I mean, it might for a minute. You might have like a small opportunity of time to say, no, I did work. Look, I mean, I made hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars over the course of these years, but then things changed. It was like, yeah, like they always do. All right. Where are we at here? Sounds like he reads a lot to me. I do read a lot. What I don't read is a lot of books. I don't sit there and read books. What I read is speeches. I read, short article. Like I read stuff that usually takes me about 10 or 15 minutes to read. Right? Because that's about as long as my attention span goes, is about 10 or 15 minutes. I've gotten better at it over the years where I can continue on a little bit longer, especially if the topic is interesting. But when you're diving into monetary policy, this stuff is boring as hell. Like, I mean, sitting around through this stuff, it's just like, it's not exactly like, thrilling information, that's going to keep you really going on it. So I do. I break it down into short chunks and I read all day. I read constantly. How else would I come up with this stuff? You think I make all this stuff up? All right. Wow. Already over 2 hours. What'd I miss? Well, let's start from the beginning. All right. Lots more data coming out this morning. Plenty of things to doctor up for the credible threat. Yeah. All right. A rate cut right now would appear as a panic. I totally agree. And the markets would react badly. Yep. No rate cut this year, my friends, but I don't need rate cuts to do business. Now, and I wouldn't necessarily take rate cuts completely out of the realms of possibility. What I would say, and I have been saying, and I'm going to say going into the future, is that the communications that they are putting out there right now is a no rate cut communication. The moment that they put it out there that they are going to cut, that way the market, like they may not give you exactly how much they're going to cut by, but they are going to say we are going to cut because they want the markets to start acting and behaving as if those rate cuts had happened. So when the rate cuts do happen, it's a non-event. That's important to understand, that if they shock the markets, that's not what they're intending to do. That is the last thing they're intending to do, is to shock the markets. They want it very well communicated ahead of time so that when the rate cuts take place, nothing changes in the markets. All right? It just transfers from one day over to the next, and everybody was already positioned ahead of time. That's what the Federal Reserve is going to do. Right? So I mean, that's it. That's what they're going to do. All right. Cuts will send inflation higher. That's the problem. I don't think they will. I don't think the rate cuts is going to create the inflationary scenario that people anticipate it would. Right? I don't think that's necessarily the case. And the reason for that is because even if they were to cut now, they would still be far above the neutral rate, which is still going to be restrictive. What will create an inflationary scenario is supply-demand imbalances. Right? That's really where the inflationary is going to come from. I mean, think about it. All the low interest rates and money printing and all that other stuff through in quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4 failed to produce the inflation that the Fed was looking for. So a little interest rate cut right now would probably not be the reason why we would have an inflationary scenario ramping back up. I think an inflationary scenario would be coming from the fact that we have a slowdown in manufacturing and the real shortages will be kicking in supply and demand imbalances. Okay? That's really what it comes from. I mean, even the Federal Reserve has said that they've gotten all the help from the supply side that they're going to get. So there is no more inflationary relief or inflation pressure coming out of, like, the relief of the inflation pressure from the supply side that's done. Like, it's run its course. So now everything that we are going to experience as far as the inflationary pressures coming down is going to be more from the demand side of things. The supply side isn't going to help. The demand side is going to have to come down. Right? And with elevated interest rates, that's going to be the demand side of things. But really, you have to think about it on the employment side, right? So if unemployment is starting to rise, then that would be pressure on the demand. But if the unemployment doesn't rise, right, that's going to be the demand being elevated. The demand side of things. You got the supply and demand, right? How do you deal with these two? So yeah, will it actually cause the inflation to go higher? I don't know. Like, I mean, interest rate cutting and zero interest rate policy post the great financial crisis didn't do it. Simon, did you get a chance to look into the footnote you thought you remember? No, I didn't, but thanks for bringing that up, because I should go check that out. That was in Bernanke's speech, wasn't it? I'll have to go look that one up. All right. Hi, Simon. The hardest working man on YouTube. Thanks. I appreciate it, man. Whoa, just got up and you've been here for 2 hours already. Yeah, Wayne, we've been going at it. I'm going to call it quits here in just a minute, though, because I'm going to go in and relax a little bit before I go to work. All right, I got to get at least 4 hours of sleep a day. Yeah, I already slept for 4 hours. See, I fell asleep about 8 and I got up a little after midnight, so I've already been sleeping for 4 hours. All right. When the fire sale is done and the business is no longer there and supply is no longer there, it's time to raise prices. Well, and that's, I mean, ultimately, that's what ends up happening when you have a slowdown in manufacturing, is that you just simply didn't produce the stuff. We're going to experience that right now in the lumber industry. Actually, follow lumber. Just follow lumber. What you see happening within the lumber industry, other industries are going to be facing somewhat of the similar thing. Like, lumber is about ready to face some major shortages, right? I mean, like, major shortages. Shortages, like, I mean, is it going to be to the extreme level that we had seen during the pandemic? I doubt it. It's probably not going to achieve that sort of level of shortages. But we are going to be facing some shortages coming in that are going to be quite significant within this economy, and you are going to find lumber prices moving up dramatically. Right? Now, I don't know how far out that's going to take, but I can tell you right now, as somebody who works at a lumber yard, who does retail sales for a living, who is in communication with wholesalers, distributors, retailers, mills, and loggers, everybody else inside of the industry, I am telling you now, there is huge shortages of lumber that is now within the industry. 2x8, 2x10, 2x12, 16, 20-foot lengths are getting very, very, very difficult to source out. Are they out there? Sure, but not nearly as prevalent as they once were in the past, where you could just order them up at any time you wanted and you were able to get a supply of them. Right now, 2x8s, 16-footers, gone. Can't find a single unit anywhere in the Portland area. All right? Gone. Mills have been in curtailment, and they are saying we are only producing that which is in the highest demand, which is going to be 2x4 and 2x6 studs and plate stock. 2x8, 2x10, 2x12, nope. Not nearly as much demand, certainly not going to produce it if there isn't a demand for it, and you are finding that those things are in short supply. I have been warning people for months now. Do not take an eye off of lumber. If you blink, you will miss it. Right? It's happening right now. Nobody notices it because it's still at 500 per thousand. The moment that we have a real rate cut or a real stimulating effect coming to the builders, where they say, hey, yeah, the buyers are coming to market, we're in the game, we're going to start building, they start getting into it, they order that lumber, and they're going to find that they zap the inventory and there's not enough out there, and prices will skyrocket. I have very little doubt in my mind lumber is not going to get any cheaper than what it is right now. Right? Could it? Sure. I mean, I shouldn't say that. Could lumber get cheaper? Yeah, why not? Right? We're at 500 per thousand. I mean, mills could hardly make any money at 500 per thousand. They have all been in curtailments for months now. Even some of them have permanently shut down operations, knowing that they're not going to be able to produce at 500 per thousand. But, could it get lower? Sure. I guess it could. Not going to go much. I mean, considering what's happening right now with the industry, I can't imagine it getting much cheaper than this. And if you have shortages on a massive scale and the threat of a Federal Reserve dropping interest rates going into the future, I cannot see how it is that lumber is going to get any cheaper than what we got right now. In fact, I can only see the opportunity for it to skyrocket in price. And that's really what I think is going to happen. It's because there is not enough manufacturing of lumber happening right now. The real shortages. Right? Just like everything else is going to take place out there, lumber is an indicator of how that operates. There's just not enough demand for it. Because there's not enough demand for it, the price is low. With a low price, the manufacturers don't want to produce. They're not going to. At some point, the demand will outpace the supply, and you will find the prices skyrocket, and that's when the mills will go back into operation again. It's not that hard to see it. It's the bullwhip effect, and it's not greed or manipulation. It just happens to be the way the economy works. Right? Yeah, people could make a conscious decision not to behave with human instincts and nature to them, but that's not going to happen. Everybody's going to do the same thing, right? When you see expensive material out there, you're going to want to produce that material to try and sell it at that high price. When producers start producing, they produce too much trying to take advantage of that high price, and it collapses the price. When that price collapses, then the producers say, I'm not going to produce anymore because the price isn't right, and they tighten up inventory. You can look at this, whether it's lumber or beer or anything else out there, it doesn't matter, right? It all faces the same issues. Now, is the timing the same? Of course not. Does it look the same? No. I mean, there could be all kinds of little differences that make it appear differently, but it's always the same way. It's always the same thing, right? Simon, why is Warren Buffett so heavy in cash? Is he expecting a big decline in the markets? I would only assume yes, right? I mean, when a recession kicks in, everything goes on sale. And in order to take advantage of it being on sale, you have to have the cash on hand. So, yeah. What time is it? It's just getting late. All right. I'm going to go, guys. We're almost 3 hours into this live stream, and it's almost 5 o'clock, and I should probably go and lay down for a little bit so I ain't just completely exhausted by the end of the day. Simon, oh yeah, we already did that one. Let's see here. I usually do 25 years of rotating swing shifts. Minimum is 4 a.m. Good. All right. Hey, bro, what's going on with you? What did you eat for breakfast this morning? What did I eat for breakfast this morning? I had a blueberry muffin thing that Sarah had made and a cup of coffee from yesterday's pot that I had made. So, day-old coffee and an old muffin. It wasn't that old. It was actually a fairly fresh muffin. Alrighty, guys. I think we should call it quits. We've been at it long enough. It was a great morning. I love hanging out here in the early AM with you guys. We had 192 people. I saw it was well over 200 at one point. 178 likes with $10.97 in super chats because you guys are always so supportive of the channel. Understanding and breaking this information down so that we can internalize it for our own needs, for our own like what it is that we need to do for our family, for our retirements, for our business, for our friends. This information is not something that is to be taken lightly, right? It's the stuff that you need to internalize, understand it for ourselves so that we can make the most and best appropriate decisions for ourselves that align with our values and our wants and our needs. And that's not going to be the same for everybody. So understanding this stuff for ourselves is really the only way that we can get this done. And this is what we're doing. We're breaking these speeches down. We're talking about the communications. We're sharing our opinions, our ideas. You know, just because I contradict some of the things that people have suggested on what they think is going on out there doesn't make me right. Right? I want to be the first to admit that doesn't make me necessarily right. But I will share my honest opinion on what it is that, is being stated out there. And I, have a tendency to contradict a lot of stuff that's being said because there's so many differences in the way that we are now operating this economy, or how the Federal Reserve is operating monetary policy, and the way that we conduct ourselves in accordance to that has changed so much over the years. I just don't see how it is that, that you can figure out what to do outside of having these types of conversations, because it's a new game and there's no place to go to get the information if you're not figuring it out for yourself. Right? Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.